Morning.
Good morning, Chair. We'll now be hearing from Mr. Luke in Stonebrewer, please.
Thank you.
Oh, sure.
Can you just repeat after me?
Yep.
I do solemnly,
I do solemnly,
sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth. Thank you.
Good morning. Can you give us your full name, please?
Yeah, it's Mr. Luke in Stonebrewer.
Thank you. And Mr. Innsbruck, you gave a statement for the inquiry, and that's our reference MAR 000001. And I'm going to ask the inquiry and the Chair to adjust that in full.
Thank you.
What that means, Mr. Innsbruck, is that that's now part of the evidence to the inquiry, so I don't need to take you through every line in it. If I can start by asking just a few questions about the background of your working at Brookhouse. You worked as a DCO at Brookhouse from 2010 to 2017, is that right?
That is correct, yes.
For around 7 years. And you say in your statement at paragraph 5 that prior to working at Brookhouse, your background was in retail, is that right?
That's correct.
And you say at paragraph 6 that when you first applied to Brookhouse, you thought it was to work at Gatwick Airport and would involve stamping passports. Is that right?
It wasn't very clear what the job description was, from what I remember. So it was only when I went in for training did I truly realise what I've got myself into. And I think that was the same with quite a lot of other people, because on the first day, a couple of them dropped out.
So you think that others also thought you were going to be stamping passports?
Probably, yeah. I wouldn't know if that was their intentions, but...
So that must have come as a bit of a shock to you.
Oh, yeah, it was a shock to the system, certainly.
And you say that after the first day, a few people decided it wasn't for them, but you were intrigued by the role and decided to stay. What intrigued you about the role?
It was just something very different. Simple as that.
Different to working in retail?
Yeah.
And you say that for the first 6 years at Brookhouse, you worked as a DCO on both C and D wings, yes. And then during your final year, you were primarily in activities. Is that right?
That's correct.
And moving on to ask some questions about the environment at Brookhouse. You refer from paragraphs 11 to 15 of your statement to an increase in the number of detained people and a decrease in staffing levels at one point, and you say that that left detainees feeling ignored and on some occasions telling you they felt unsafe.
That's correct.
How would you respond to detainees telling you they felt unsafe?
I can't really remember how I would respond to it. It was 5 years ago, but I know personally it was sad, because there was very minimum I could do. Around that sort of time period, essentially, I was just, a person with keys, where before if you had more than, 2 officers, you had 3 or 4, you could go round the wing, you could associate with the detainees, engage with them, where you can help them with their issues. When you don't have the staff, when you're left with staff with just 1 or 2, that becomes very hard to do.
When they would say that they felt unsafe, I mean, can you remember, was this on one occasion, was this a few different people?
No, it was just sporadic. There could be various incidents. It could be, a common one was, certain groups of detainees would disrupt roll counts. That they would, slam on other detainees' doors that were being compliant, that went to their rooms on, when the time was appropriate. And they would delay the roll counts, so those detainees that were complying had their meal times delayed or associations delayed.
How does that affect their safety, though? No,
but where they're aggressively slamming on the doors, they felt unsafe, because it was loud. They weren't used to that sort of environment. You think if you've never been in custody before, and you know, your introduction to that is, you know, people slamming on your doors. That's quite a scary sort of environment.
And when you were being told by detainees that they felt unsafe, was
Sure.
that always they felt unsafe because of other detainees, or was it because of staff, or because of something else?
A lot of it was other detainees.
All of it?
No, I don't know if it was all of it. The examples I was given from other detainees, from detainees that would express it, was, you know, they were, I think they were, it's my personal opinion, that it was other detainees.
Okay. Did anyone ever tell you that they felt unsafe because of any staff member or staff in general?
No.
No. And you sort of talked about how this impact on staffing, with staffing going down and the number of detainees going up. Was that something
Sure.
you ever raised with a manager?
Yes.
What did you say?
I said, we don't have enough staff. Quite simply, we don't have enough staff on the wing.
Do you remember who you said that to?
I said it's the senior management team.
Who
I
are we
can't remember specific names.
The senior management team, at least in the latter part of your time there, was there's people like Jules Williams, Michelle Brown, Steve Skipp, Ben Saunders. Was it any of them? Do you remember?
Steve Skip, for definite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And you say in your statement that the SMT would simply dismiss concerns because they lacked experience of working in the wings. Is that right?
Yes.
And is that, again, talking about Steve Skipp?
It'd be one of them, yes.
Yeah. And you say they lacked experience of working on the wings. Would they be on the wings? Would you see them on the wings?
You'd see them on the wings, but I would say, from my experience, they'd probably be on there for about 10 minutes tops. It'd be the wing door to the wing office, sign the diaries, and then it'd be back out again. If they were sitting here today, I would ask them, do they know what the facilities the detainees had on the top floor? Because I'd be surprised if any of them actually knew. They didn't spend time on the wings. If you saw them even on the second floor of the wings, it'd be surprising.
And do you think there was, therefore, a sort of divorce from the reality of life at Brookhouse?
Oh, absolutely.
Do you think that you and other DCOs, DCMs knew what it was like, but at the senior management level?
Oh, absolutely. Where we lacked staff, we had a surplus of uniforms. Nothing would have stopped them from grabbing some uniform and giving us a hand. But they didn't.
And do you have any view as to why that was?
I just don't think they really cared, to be honest.
Cared about what?
They cared about the staffing levels.
Okay.
Or understood it.
In your witness statement, Mr. Unsenborough, you refer to a change in policy at some point. You don't remember exactly when, and you say that previously detainees could be given 3 warnings, and then the custody manager could decide on further action, such as removal from association. Is that right?
Correct.
And does that mean that after 3 warnings, somebody could be removed from association and taken to the CSU as a punishment?
Possibly, not all time. It depends on what the warnings contained, the context of it. It wasn't always the case. It was whatever was appropriate and proportionate.
Were you conscious of the use of Rule 40 of taking someone to the CSU as a possible means of punishment, even if it was after a few warnings?
I can't remember.
You say that at some point that policy changed, and it meant that staff's ability to challenge poor behaviour was nullified. Is that right?
Correct.
And would you personally have preferred a more punitive regime?
Explain.
So you've said that change in policy nullified staff's ability to challenge poor behaviour. What would you have liked the ability to do to challenge poor behaviour?
Something effective. It's not that I wanted detainees to be punished. I wanted detainees to be protected against those that were being disruptive.
What does that actually mean? I mean, what type of thing are you talking about?
Sorry.
What type of thing are you actually talking about? I mean, what
Yeah.
sort of sanctions, what sort of action could you have
Well,
taken?
no, just before, there was the free warning system. They were spoken to by DCM, and the appropriate action was taken. Either, they were put under, I believe it was like a bully log, or they could, like you said, go to CSU. But I cannot remember what they replaced it with. I think it was literally nothing. And yeah, how do you tackle, disruptive behaviour?
In your experience, was control and restraint ever used as punishment for poor behaviour?
No,
Was anyone ever roughed up as a punishment?
no, absolutely not.
Okay. One of the things you say at paragraph 22 of your statement is that the senior management team seemed more interested in publishing KPI targets, key performance indicator targets, and reports, most of which were misleading because of an underreporting of incidents
Yes.
and pressure put on staff to get people off ACDTs as quickly as possible. Just delving into those a bit separately.
Sure.
So in terms of the underreporting of incidents, you give an example of the type of incidents that were underreported as being staff being attacked by detainees. Is that
Yes.
right? What other kind of incidents were underreported?
No, I'll correct that. It's that's a target sheet that I saw stuck with me more personally because it didn't address my own incident that I had. It said that they had no incident of detainees' attacks on officers, which simply wasn't true because I was a victim of it. And it kind of just opened my eyes to, I know it sounds ridiculous, but it's a private sector, it's an actual business. It's not, before it had the blurred lines of being, something that, working with the Home Office, but no, there's KPI targets, it's...
So you understood that they had targets for the number of incidents of
and
staff being
I
attacked?
don't know why, but I found that inappropriate.
Okay. And so you thought, for example, where a staff member was attacked, that might not be reported because they wanted to meet their KPI targets. Okay. And is the only example that you at least saw personally of that
I saw personally...
where you were attacked and it wasn't
Oh,
reported?
absolutely. That's why I highlight it.
Okay. And so you weren't aware of any other types of incidents being underreported, like use of force?
No, not what I know of.
Self-harm?
No.
One of the things you say is that there was a pressure put on staff to get people off ACDTs as quickly as possible.
Yes.
So can you explain that a bit more? Is it the case that vulnerable detainees who are on ACDT are taken off prematurely so to
No,
minimise
it wasn't.
reporting?
Not that at all. What it was because you had the lack of staff. So say, for instance, hypothetically, what would be common? On DWIN, you'd have 2 members of staff. You'd have, 150 to 180 detainees. And then you think if there was 2 or 3 ACDTs on top of that.
Would people on ACDT be in E-wing though, rather than D-wing?
No, you could have ACDTs on the open wings as well.
Okay.
You can. So, and then they could be of all different timescales. So you might have to do observations every hour on one of them. You might have to do an observation every half an hour for another. You might have to do an observation every 3 hours for another one, So if you've only got 2 officers, and sometimes on a common occasion you could only have 1, it was near impossible. But the pressure put on that officer to ensure that he made those observations to that ACDT, because if anything happened to that person, that that poor officer's going to a coroner's court, you know. It's not going to be, you know, and it's no fault to them.
So just to sort of try and
Yeah,
get
sure,
to the crux of it then, are you saying that people were pressured to get people off ACDTs quickly because simply there wasn't enough staff to do the constant observations
Yes.
required? And do you think that led to people being taken off ACDT when they probably shouldn't have been?
I wouldn't know if that's the case, but I know the narrative with a lot of officers was, you know, we don't want ACDTs because they didn't have the staffing for it.
And does that refer both to once people are already on ACDT, but also to opening up ACDTs as well?
Correct.
So you'd be sort of pressured, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but would there be any pressure to not put people on ACDT as well?
What, for me personally? Or,
Yeah,
or-
yeah.
Not for me personally. If someone was, you know, stressed or, you know, there was a risk, I'd feel that, you know, they do need to be on an ACDT.
So you would
but,
open one?
I very rarely did, I'll be honest.
Because?
I didn't feel the need for there to be one. But if I did, I would open one, yes.
Okay. So you personally didn't feel that pressure?
I did feel that pressure
Okay.
a few times, yeah.
So
I will admit that. When I was on the wins on my own, yeah, sure. I would question anyone to not feel that pressure.
And just to be clear about that, when we're talking about that pressure, do you mean general pressure or do you mean pressure not to open an ACDT?
General pressure.
Okay. Not the latter. Did you ever feel pressure not to open an ACDT?
No.
You described, Mr. Insenbrewer, that staff morale dropped to a level which you describe as an abyss at one point.
Sure.
Do you think that management were aware of that?
I don't know.
And sorry, you can expand.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I think they eventually became aware. I think it was impossible not to become aware because the amount of staffing that left or were off because of stress, you'd have to be blind not to be aware of it. But to begin with, no, I don't think.
And is there a particular point at which you're thinking of that abyss? Was there a particular month or time when it just went and dropped?
No, it was just a slow sort of. Yeah, there's no real,
There's no trigger.
I think it was just staffing levels, and they refused to, or they inadequately bumped up those staffing levels, and I think it just snowballed from there, really.
And do you think there was any consequence for detained people of staff morale being that low? Do you think people were frustrated, took out that frustration on detainees, for example?
Possibly.
In what way? Verbally, physically?
I never really saw any physical, verbal, so I couldn't really say.
Okay. You never saw someone, who had low morale shouting at a detainee, for example?
Oh, I actually, not physically, but verbally, yeah.
You did see
Yeah.
that.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
And do you think that was a consequence of the low morale, that people would be
I
frustrated?
think it was
and do
a
that?
consequence of many things. Low morale, low staffing. People were tired. They had a lot of pressure on them. Yeah, I think it was
And did it
another thing.
affect the ability to care for detainees? We've heard from some other people that worked in activities who said, for example, that it might mean that they had to open the courtyard late or not at all, and it meant the detainees sometimes couldn't get out to get fresh air. Was that your experience as well?
Sure, yeah.
So you think
Absolutely.
it did have that consequence?
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the other things you say is that you felt that staff weren't sufficiently trained or equipped to help people with mental health problems. Is that right?
Yeah.
And, for example, did you ever receive training to help people with mental health problems?
The only training we would receive is the signs and the symptoms sort of things, very basic stuff.
Was that at the beginning of your employment, or was that during?
That was during.
Okay. And so, for example, were you taught about what to do with someone who has PTSD, for example?
No.
Were you taught about how to deal with spice attacks?
No.
And were you taught about what to do if somebody threatened self-harm or had self-harmed?
No.
Okay. One of the things you say when describing the sort of environment of Brookhouse at paragraph 25 is you say that Brookhouse was set up like a Category B prison, but without the resources and management structures to operate as such. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, it was set up like a Category B prison, like it said. I don't know what.
But what do you mean without the management structures or the resources? What were they?
Without the officers, they didn't have the staff. The management didn't have a set expectation. I'll be honest, you didn't know really what you were working for. It's a Category B prison, but it's an immigration set. It's like, which one is it? Some of the management were more towards the line of like a prison mentality, and another one would be where it's more of a removal centre, and you're just, well, what's the consistent expectation that you have for your business? I think that was a big issue as well. There was no consistent expectation of what they wanted their officers to be.
And how they wanted people to treat detainees?
Absolutely.
As well? Okay. Just on a specific thing about management, and you say in your statement that, at paragraph 50, that you got the impression that the DCM role, when people got promoted, wasn't earned on merit, but was given based on who you knew. You say it, Mr. Insuber.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Why did you think that?
No, I don't know if it's been a bit disingenuous, actually. It's just what my personal opinion was on it.
Did you ever apply to become a DCM?
Did I ever apply? I applied once.
Okay.
But I'll be honest, looking back, I wouldn't have been good at it. I was a young person. I wasn't old and, I wasn't mature enough for that sort of role.
Is there anyone in particular you're thinking of as got promoted because of who they knew rather than their capability?
No. I'll be honest, I thought a lot of the DCMs were very good. I think they worked quite hard, and I can't really fault many of them. No.
So why do you say that the role was earned given based on who people knew? What were you thinking of when you wrote that?
I think what I was thinking on that, there was a few DCMs who got the role before they had even passed their probation. I think I'm more going down the lines of that it wasn't earned through experience. But I don't know, it's just the way you say it in a negative sort of connotation. I don't want it to be that.
We've heard some evidence from some of your former colleagues talking about cliques at Brookhouse. Is that the sort of thing that you're talking about, that people were part of a group of friends, for example, and then...
Sure, there was friends, but, it's a high-intense environment. I never saw it as a clique or some secret society, absolutely not. It's just people unwinding from a high-intense environment. As simple as that. There was no cliques or anything like that.
One of the things you say towards the end of your statement, Mr. Nzumbura, this is at paragraph 68, Roman numeral 8, you're asked about a list of staff and your views on them and whether you worked on them. And just to ask you about one of those, you give your opinion on Clayton Fraser's conduct, saying that he was trying to fit in with the CSU group and what he may have thought was their mentality. What did you mean by the CSU group?
So... There's no CSU group. It's when you're on CSU. I rarely was on it. It's just my observation. I believe that there are you kind of put on a persona that you're a tough person because it's not a nice area. he kind of put a hard exterior on, and my impression of Clayton Fraser was he wasn't that. He was a nice guy.
So when you say in your statement that the CSU group, there's not a specific
No.
group of people.
No.
What you mean is the people who worked
Who
on
were
scene.
working that? Yeah, absolutely.
So we've heard evidence from some people who worked often on the CSU or on E-Wing, from Derek Murphy, from Jan Pascali. Are those the type of people you're
Sure.
talking about?
Not particularly. It's just anyone that works on there. I think it's just something that you create for yourself to.
So
to
no one
cope.
particular you've got in mind?
No.
Okay. Now I want to come on to ask you about some allegations made against you.
Sure.
First of all, in relation to allegations of bullying in 2015-16. If we can have up on screen, please, Zainab,
Sure.
CJS 00736777. Mr. Inselborough, this is an email, if we go to the bottom, please. This is an
Sure.
email from Stacey Dean, who I believe was the former head of Tinsley House,
Sure.
on the 25th of October 2015 to Ben Saunders and Steve Skett. And she says, "Hi both, this detainee, which is D5100, made a complaint to me about his treatment by DCOs Fagbo and Instone Brewer. He claims they've spent the last week goading him, taking it in turns to give warnings, ignoring him and deliberately going to his room to remove items, such as a pillow he claims another member of staff gave him. He claimed that yesterday they came to his room while he was asleep to issue a warning and shouted in his face, which was why he lost it. Don't get me wrong, he's far from the nicest detainee and has a bad history. But every time there's an issue in D-Wing, I always receive complaints about these two in particular." Do you remember this occasion, Mr. Insunborough?
No.
Did you spend a week deliberately goading a detainee, taking it in turns with DCO Fagbo, going to his room deliberately and shouting in his face when he was asleep?
Not something I would do. No.
You would never shout in someone's face when they're asleep.
Absolutely not. No.
Stacey Dean notes that every time there's an issue on D-Wing, she always receives complaints about you and DCO Fagbo in particular.
Sure.
Any reason why she'd say that?
I couldn't understand why she would say that. She's, like you said, she's from Tinsley House, not Brookhouse. I rarely.
She's saying that she's received complaints about you, though.
Where from? Where?
Well, she says, for
Yeah,
example,
sure.
D510 made a complaint.
I don't know.
Okay.
No.
At the end of the email, over the next page, she says, "Other staff and DCOs also told me they need splitting up." That's talking about you and
Fine.
DCO Fagbo, as they're always causing issues. And whilst D5100's behaviour is far from appropriate, they also felt he'd been goaded. "I do think this needs looking into. As much as I would love to trust the staff and their account, I simply don't. Hope that doesn't sound too harsh." Do you remember being split up from DCO Fagbo?
No.
And do you remember Stacey Dean ever talking to you about this issue?
Absolutely not.
Do you remember anyone ever talking to you about this issue?
No one approached me about this issue.
Okay.
It's first time I heard of it was 5 years later,
Okay.
when there's an inquiry breathing
Okay.
down their necks.
Let's go on to. Well, this was written in 2015, though, as you see. Yeah.
But it was never approached to me.
Okay.
This would have been when I was on the residential unit. They would have had a full year afterwards to approach me. Never did.
And you worked with DCO Fagbo on the unit.
I
yeah.
did, and the only reason we stopped working together is because I took the steps to remove myself off the wins.
After the incident where you
Where I
were
got
stabbed.
attacked, yeah. So,
Okay, let's move on to the next document then.
Sure.
Zainab, CGS 00736333, please. This is a meeting from January 2017, a grievance meeting that Stacey Dean attended with Jerry Petherick, who was a senior manager at G4S. So this is January 2017. This is also obviously before the relevant period, about 8 months before Panorama, or 9 months.
sure.
And she says, about halfway down the page, page 4 actually, please. She says, third paragraph, when Medway occurred, it was reported that we monitored CNR, but this never got actioned. And at the time, I raised reports about 2 members of staff bullying, and nothing was done. My take on this is that we are all good that issues are monitored on camera, but the risk is those bullies that do this away from cameras, and there are 2 staff that are responsible for this. And then Jerry Petherick asks, can I ask for the names of those staff? Stacey Dean says, Luke Brewer and Babs Fagbo. And then she goes on to say, I had reported this before and documented this to Steve and Ben, brackets, most complained about officers at Brook. Complaints from detainees with regard to them antagonising and goading, and this raised alarm bells from Medway. Just prior to Lee leaving, I was asked to undertake an investigation, and Lee was sent an email detailing what has been sent to Ben and Steve, but clearly nothing had been done. When Ben returned, I was removed from the investigation for Ben to complete and was asked to look at a matter of Luke and his CNR. Ben said he was going to give this investigation to someone else, brackets Jules, but my concern is that Jules is known to be friendly with other DCMs and officers, and staff are concerned about raising issues and that staff sickness was looked into. So she's saying there that you and Babs Fagbo are bullies and were the most complained about officers at Brookhouse. Do you have any idea why she would say that?
Absolutely not.
Did you have any contact with Stacey Dean?
Very minimum.
Do you remember her?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Given that you say that there's minimal contact between you, would you accept that if she's describing you as the most complained about officers at Brook and as bullies, that is probably because she'd received complaints about you?
Possibly. I don't know.
Because you say this was never raised with you.
It was never raised, so I don't know.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And you say you wholeheartedly deny any allegation of bullying, is that right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So not only were you never spoken to about it, but now that these documents have been shown to you, you deny that it ever took place?
What, take place between them? Or
No,
me?
you deny that you ever bullied a detainee.
I never bullied detainee, no.
Okay. If we can go, please, to CJS 0073671, please. Page 3, please. This is Mr. Innsbruck, this is an interview with Michelle Brown in October 2017. And she says, in summary, that in 2016, a detainee made a complaint against you and Babatunde Fagbo for poor behaviour, bullying and inappropriate behaviour, which was substantiated. DCM James Begg investigated and reported Jules Williams. Do you remember James Begg investigating you in 2016?
No, never raised with me.
So Michelle Brown here is saying that this happened and you think that is entirely made up?
I'm not saying it's made up. I'm saying it was never raised to me and I cannot remember it.
But presumably, given the suggestion is that
Sure.
it was a substantiated allegation of poor behaviour, bullying and inappropriate behaviour,
Sure.
if it had happened, you would remember it, yes?
Absolutely, but like I said, it was never highlighted with me or brought to my attention. So, you know.
Can you think of any reason why Michelle Brown might make that up?
I wouldn't know, unless, you know, unfortunately, like I said, it's never highlighted with me.
Michelle Brown and Stacey Dean are 2 fairly senior managers at
Sure,
Brookhouse.
sure.
Presumably you didn't have any particularly negative relationship with either of them, or did you?
Stacey Dean wasn't the greatest fan, but Michelle Brown, absolutely, no, I was absolutely fine with. So
Okay. You say in your witness statement, Mr. Inston Brewer, at paragraphs 51 to 52, that you don't recall ever being subject to a formal disciplinary procedure, but you say that there were, of course, occasions when disgruntled detainees would allege that staff, including myself, had said or done something inappropriate, like verbally insult them. But I was never, so far as I am aware, investigated or proven to have done anything like that.
correct.
So do you remember being the subject of allegations of bullying?
I was never approached by senior management team about it.
Never.
No.
Okay. Never investigated by DCM James Begg. Never by
Not
Jules
to my
Williams.
knowledge. Not to my knowledge, no.
Back to this document. The paragraph below where I was reading, she says, this was due to go to disciplinary, but Luke Instone Brewer submitted the grievance and the disciplinary was paused. The grievance took 8 months. Stacey Dean was allocated to it, but she fell ill. Kaz Dance Joe inherited it in November 2016 and it was partially substantiated. Dan Houghton had been given the disciplinary to do, but forgot to do it. Now we'll come on to the grievance shortly, but just to ask again, were you aware of that disciplinary investigation at all?
No.
If we can move over to page 4, please. At the top, it says, I continue to mention James Wesley, second sentence, Luke Instone and Babs Fagbo would be mentioned in SMT meetings. They were split up eventually, end of 2016, early 2017, but this was because Babs Fagbo wanted to move and Luke Instone Brewer wanted to move. So do you remember there was any sort of deliberate decision to split you up, or was it just that you went your separate ways?
Just went our separate ways.
And if we can go to CGS 0073682. At page 2, please. Mr. Innsbruck, this is an interview of Steve Skitt in November 2017. And the very bottom paragraph, it says, Stacey was investigating Luke Instone Brewer and Babs Fagbo. James Begg did an original investigation around the detainee being unlocked last, which was upheld. They were then split up. Does that jog your memory at all, an investigation about someone being unlocked last?
No.
That's 3 senior managers at Brookhouse, or in the Gatwick IRC, all saying separately that they were aware of you and Babs Fagbo being investigated in 2016 and 2015. Can you give us any reason as to why all 3 of those people have got it wrong?
I'm not saying they got it wrong, I'm saying it was never highlighted with me, so I don't know about it.
So you were never interviewed about it?
Absolutely not, no.
Are you surprised now to see the suggestion that allegations against you were substantiated?
5 years later, you know, it is a shock. Yeah, it is a surprise. But
Okay. I want to come on to ask you about briefly about the grievance which you raised.
sure.
In summary, you discuss in your statement an incident in June 2016 which led to you raising a grievance.
Yes.
And in summary, that was an altercation between 2 detained people that led to you being cut with a plastic knife
Yes.
4 times on your wrist. Is that right?
That's correct.
And if we go to your grievance document, please, that's at CGS 0073055. This is a letter which you sent in. It's not dated, but we know that it's sometime after July 2016, because
Sure.
that's the last date on the final page. If we go to the bottom of page 2, please. So you've set out almost a chronology in this grievance letter, Mr. Instone Brewer. You've set out what happened under various dates in the summer of 2016.
Sure.
And you say under the 27th of June 2016, you note that you were informed that, and this is about halfway down the page, you say, I was also informed that an email had been sent by Duty Director Jules Williams on this day informing the DCMs that I would have to work on C-Wing due to an investigation involving one of my colleagues. I was taken back by the lack of foresight in such action, as I was being placed on a wing where my attacker had recently been.
Yes.
Do you remember which colleague was being investigated?
No.
Was it Babs? Could it have been Babs Fagbo?
I don't know. I couldn't really say.
Were you quite friendly with Babs Fagbo when you were
Yeah,
working
we
there?
worked together.
Do you
We
think-
worked on D-Win. It was just most of the time it was just the 2 of us working on D-Win.
Do you think you would have known if he was under investigation for an allegation made against him?
Most likely.
And do you think you would remember if that was the case?
I couldn't say.
But you
That's a
don't
bit of a
remember.
hard question to ask, is it?
I appreciate that.
I don't know.
But you don't remember him being investigated for anything
It was
like
5 years ago, so I don't know.
that? Okay. Now, on the next page, please. Under the 6th of July 2016, you say, I received a letter from G4S. At first, I was happy, thinking it had something to do with my incident, only to find it was a letter informing me to attend an investigation meeting on an incident that happened with another colleague of mine. You say, what really upset me about this is how much of the backstory of what has led up to this investigation has been leaked to other officers and management and has clearly been compromised for everyone to know about. I first just shrugged them off as rumours, but the letter just confirmed what was being said. I'd been told the complaint had been passed to 3 DCMs, and the detainee who put the complaint in had withdrawn the complaint. Do you remember this investigation?
I can't remember, no.
This is obviously you writing that you were asked to attend an investigation meeting, so presumably you'd accept that you were asked to attend an investigation meeting.
I don't know what the investigation meeting is about.
Do you recall at all during the last couple of years of your employment going to an investigation meeting?
The only thing that I can recall is about my grievance, but no other investigation meeting.
Do you think this could have been about the sort of things that I was asking you about before, about bullying?
As far as I was aware, no.
Okay.
I can't remember any of that, no.
Was any part of the reason for raising your grievance that you wanted to prevent or delay any disciplinary investigation?
Absolutely not.
No, you weren't aware of any disciplinary investigation?
I wasn't, no.
Because we've seen, as I took you to before, Michelle Brown said that
Sure.
your disciplinary was delayed because you raised a grievance, but you weren't aware of that at the time.
They're a global company. Can they not manage a grievance and a disciplinary at the same time?
Well, she says that they couldn't.
They couldn't? Well, that's
Sure, but
quite incompetent, ain't it, for a global company. I don't accept that. But,
Okay.
no, I wasn't aware of any complaint. And I don't... I advocate if they did have a complaint, that, they can investigate. I'm not going to stop them from doing that, but I'm not going to have a negative connotation put on my grievance. Absolutely not.
In relation to this grievance, you say in your statement, Mr. Vincent-Brewer, that at paragraph 45, you say that you were told to man up by Steve Skitt
Yes.
following the incident, and were told that it was part and parcel of the job. Is
Yes.
that right? Being attacked was part and
Yes.
parcel of the job.
And I'd like to just highlight that him being a deputy director, obviously he has quite a strong position in putting the expectations for the company. So the fact that he's saying those sort of expectations that officers should man up, and it's the nature of the job, concerns me. And it did concern me at the time, and it still does.
We've. Do you remember when this was? Was this after you raised the grievance, or was it just after the incident? Or
No, this was when I raised the grievance. He brought me into a meeting, and I put a report in about that too. After that, he didn't seem to want to talk anymore, but woefully irresponsible thing to say.
We've
in this
heard.
position.
We've heard a few witnesses talking about a macho culture which they say existed at Brookhouse. Did you perceive that to exist?
A macho culture? Sure. Sort of. I wouldn't say it was a big thing.
So, I mean, for example, being told to man up, and we also heard from another witness yesterday an example of him telling a detainee to man up. Was that sort of language of telling people to man up,
It
was
could
that
be.
common?
Common, I would say it all depended on the person. I wouldn't say it was never set as an expectation, but like I said, for someone who's a duty director, to be saying something like that is not acceptable.
And you thought that at the time as well?
Oh, absolutely, I still do.
Yeah. Okay. I want to ask you about some allegations that are made by someone we know as D687.
Sure.
If we can turn to his witness statement on screen at DPG 000021. At page 27, please. Now, at paragraph 86, he alleges that his experiences of you were that you were a racist, abusive bully, and that you would be verbally abusive towards detained people and try to provoke them into reacting. What do you say about that?
Not true. Oh,
Did you ever verbally abuse detained people?
absolutely not.
Did you ever try to provoke them into reacting?
Absolutely not. No.
We've already discussed this difficulty that happened because of a change in policy that staff couldn't challenge poor behaviour, you said.
Yeah.
Did that ever lead to staff provoking detainees in order to justify punishment?
Nothing that I witnessed. No.
And we've already discussed the allegations in the emails from Stacey Dean, where she says that you and DCO Fagbo would deliberately get detainees wound up so that you could use force on them. Did that happen with D687?
No, absolutely not. That's not true at all.
Okay. In your interview with Dominic Aitken, who was a person who was doing a doctorate at Brookhouse,
Sure.
and I think you were interviewed in the summer of 2017, so it must have been just soon before you left. If we can have that up on screen at INQ 000087. At page 3, please. I'm just going to get the right bit of the page, 1 second.
Sure.
Sorry. Just 1 second. So one of the things you say here, Mr. Winston Brewer, is when you're asked about ethnicity, you say ethnicity, and it notes that you say it does matter in a way. At paragraph 25 there, you say, I think it's harder if you're black in this place. My friend Babs gets a lot of grief from the Ds, which I presume means detainees. Is that right?
I don't know why he's put these.
But for detainees,
Yeah, sure.
These are notes.
Yeah, sure.
Did you experience Babs Fagbo receiving a lot of grief from detainees?
Absolutely. A lot of your questions are comparing me with Babs, but his experience on Brookhouse is a lot different to mine. Unfortunately, he was provoked. And he was provoked racially. A lot of times he was called a coconut, he was called a traitor, he was called a magnum, obviously the N-word and everything, but he was provoked. And the company, they didn't have any, I would advocate that you ask them, what is their policy and procedure to officers that are racially abused by detainees, because they don't have one.
Okay. Under the paragraph above that,
Sure.
you're asked about gender, and you say it's all up to the individual. Some detainees treat women differently. Jamaican nationality, if kitted, won't touch a woman, so they'll send a 3-woman team, so you'll have to walk due to chivalry. So is that referring to control and restraint interventions being conducted by women?
I don't remember saying that. I'll be honest, I do not remember saying that.
Did you have any experience of that, of the...
Yeah, there was one time that happened, but that wasn't a common occurrence. But honestly do not remember saying that.
So the one time that
That's a very
happened.
random thing to say, but yeah.
Well,
sure.
I mean, these are notes of an interview.
Yeah,
of you.
sure.
So the one time that you recall was that that managers deciding that women should do the CNR because it would be easier.
No, I'm not really quite sure. I'll be honest.
Was
I don't.
was that a stereotype about Jamaican people that they wouldn't touch a woman that you thought of?
No. I'll be honest. I don't really understand what I was saying there. I'm sure I had a point, but I can't remember.
Okay. Would you see any problems with making these sort of assumptions about people based on their nationality?
Sure.
You'd see that as a problem.
What, making a problem?
Well, would you see it as a problem to assume that Jamaican people won't touch a woman, for example?
I don't think that's the point that's been made. I think the point was being made that they obviously wouldn't hurt a woman, which I don't think is a bad point to make. But yeah, sure, making assumptions on ethnicity is a bad thing. Yeah.
Okay. If we can go back, please, to DPG 000021. Thanks, Ab. Page 27, please. So back to this. One of the other things that D687 says at paragraph 86 is that you and DCO Fagbo would laugh at people who took spice, and he says, I found that particularly twisted. Do you remember doing that?
No.
Do you think you ever did?
What, laugh at people taking spice?
Yeah.
No, I thought it was horrendous.
Okay. Paragraph 87, he says, in terms of his abuse and provocation, this often took the form of verbal abuse and comments. For example, he is one of the officers who would say, why don't you go back to your own country? And he would also refer to me as a criminal, as if that somehow justified my mistreatment and being in detention. Did you ever say to D687, why don't you go back to your own country?
No.
Did you ever say that to any detainee?
No.
Do you have any idea why he would make this allegation against you?
Probably to besmirch my good name, obviously.
Did you ever make any comments like that about people going back to their own country?
No.
Did you ever make comments referring to people as a criminal?
No.
Would you have described detained people as criminals?
No.
You've got no idea why he makes these quite specific allegations against you, other than to besmirch your good name.
Most that's all I could think of.
You say they're completely untrue.
Yes.
He also alleges as part of this paragraph that you would be unnecessarily rude and abusive during the bang-up process and would shout, get behind the fucking door, instead of asking politely for them to return to your cells. Would you ever shout, get behind the fucking door?
No.
Okay. Again, you say that's completely untrue.
That's completely untrue.
Okay. Next incident I want to ask you about, this also involves D687, but also another detained person called D1738. This is an incident on the 21st of April, and you deal with this in your statement at paragraphs 71 to 73. So you say in that statement, Mr. Instoneborough, that one of these two individuals, D687 and D1738, sent messages stating that they hoped your parents would die of cancer, and you asked them to stop and say that they didn't do so, and instead laughed and taunted you further. Is that right?
That's correct.
And if we can have up on screen your instant report about the occasion, CGS 004667. You can see under A, you're the initiator of this report. Sure. If we can go to page 3, please. And you set out at some length what happened during this incident. You refer to a detainee using a proxy to access Facebook, is that right?
That's correct.
And you say that you responded to that by blocking the website. What ability did you have when you worked in the activities role to block websites?
There was an ability to block the site. I couldn't tell you what it was called. But
I mean, roughly,
yeah,
how did this work? You log into a central computer and you type in the name of the website that needs to be blocked?
yeah, pretty much.
Like that?
Yeah.
So you would just add Facebook to it, or add the proxy site to it? In this
Just
case?
whatever that was of the company's expectations. They didn't want Facebook.
Okay. And what other websites did you block? Do you remember?
It was when I initially, it was just anything that was slowing down the server. So what was very common when I came into IT was that detainees were streaming movies. They were playing online games.
And they weren't allowed to do that.
No, they weren't. They were downloading music, and it was slowing down the system. The system couldn't take it. But on top of that, we weren't trained as in anything in IT. A lot of the officers sat there reading a newspaper because they didn't understand what the computer was really.
But did you have a decent understanding of
I had a
computers?
basic. I understood that, the way they were getting onto stuff like these sites were through proxy sites.
Yeah.
Simple as that. But that's the reason why their computer system was so inadequate was they were misused.
Well, misused in the sense that they were used to download music.
Download music, games, movies, yeah.
I mean, given that the
Sure.
people being detained at Brookhouse, they
Sure.
weren't prisoners, they were being
No,
detained
I absolutely
there.
understand that. I personally don't have an issue with it. That was the company's expectations.
So for you, it was more about the capacity of the system rather
Sure,
than about whether they should.
I'd rather prioritise the computers for people that want to use it for their cases, rather than,
Why weren't people allowed to use Facebook, do you know?
you'd have to ask G4S.
Were you never told?
I personally don't have an issue with it, but
It was never,
that was their expectations, not mine.
it was never explained to you why.
No.
One of the things that D687 alleges is that you abused the power to block websites, and he alleges that when you were on IT, parts of the government website were blocked, as were websites
No.
for charities such as Detention Action. How do you respond to that?
That's absolutely not true.
Did you ever try and block websites to stop detained people accessing advice or help for their cases?
Absolutely not.
D687 also alleges that this security incident report was exaggerated and says that although he did swear at you, you weren't distraught and he didn't make the comments about your family having cancer. Is that right?
Sorry, what's...
He says that you exaggerated this report and that although he swore at you, he didn't make any comments about your family having cancer. Did you ever exaggerate these reports?
Absolutely not. My dad was suffering from cancer at the time, so it did hit me quite hard. Normally I have quite a thick skin, but along with the stresses of the job at the time, and my father having cancer, it hit me hard, and there was no exaggeration.
Okay, if we can get up on screen, please, TRN 00000099. Please, Zainab, at page 6.
Is there any chance I can do it? 2 seconds.
Yeah,
Take
Chair.
a 5-minute break, absolutely.
Is that
Yeah,
right?
take a 5-minute break.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just like
Thank you.
Mr. Livingston.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Unsenborough, we were talking previously about that incident on the 21st of April,
Yeah.
and we're now looking at on screen at a transcript of a conversation on the 4th of May, and it has you, or it describes you as Ginge Male Officer. I think that was your nickname at Brookhouse at the time. Is that right?
For some people, yes.
Yeah. And it says, since the 21st of last month, which is the date of the incident we were just talking about, because the 21st of April, I've had this detainee every day giving me shit. I've reported it, I've gone to management, I've gone to manage, nothing. Last time I was in, I lost my shit, had to call first response. Do you remember what you meant by having lost your shit?
No.
Did you ever lose your shit at a detainee?
Not lose my shit at a detainee, no.
Did you ever?
I honestly don't know what this is in reference to.
So we've got, if we try and think back, so we've got that
Sure.
incident in the computer room, and you said that you were quite affected by that.
Yes.
And then it says, since that, you've had a detainee, presumably either one of the two people involved, every day giving you shit. You say
Okay.
you reported it, you say you went to management, and nothing had happened, and then you lost your shit. Is it possible you lost your shit at management, at the detainee?
Honestly don't know the context, no.
Can't remember.
No, cannot.
Okay. Want to come on to some further allegations against you, Mr. Unsenborough. You'll be
Sure.
aware that some allegations have been made against you in relation to smuggling drugs and other items into Brookhouse. And before I get into the specifics, did you ever smuggle drugs or any other item into Brookhouse?
Absolutely not.
And do you have any idea why people might say that you did?
No.
Is this another example of people trying to besmirch your good name?
It looks like it's malicious rumours, yes.
Okay. Let's come on to a few of the different sources of that those allegations. First of all, if we can have CGS 007369. This is an email from Stacey Dean on the 5th of January 2017. She is emailing Jerry Petherick. Good afternoon, Jerry, and then says, I've had to scan and copy the email regarding DCO Fagbo and Enstone Brewer. That's the thing we were talking about before. And if we go over to the next page, please, at the top. She says in the second paragraph, in the case of the DCOs we discussed, they are also known to be supplying spice to detainees, yet there has not been a single staff search since this information has been known. Steve constantly fobs off decisions. Were you aware that Stacey Dean had information that you were supplying spice to detainees?
No.
Did she ever raise it with you?
Absolutely not.
Did Steve Skett ever raise it with you?
No one's ever raised anything.
Okay. Let's go to CGS 00736888, please. If we can go to page 3, please. So this, Mr. Unsenborough, is an email from Daniel Robinson. Did you know Daniel Robinson?
No.
He was a DCM in the security team at this point. To Michelle Brown, Lee Hanford and Carrie Dance-Jones, subject staff drug supplying.
Okay.
And this sets out, as he says, all intel and actions regarding ex-DCO Luke Instone Brewer. And I'm going to read some of them out.
Sure.
So first of all, 31st of October 2016, reported that you take a large number of cigarette breaks and leave the workplace unattended. Is that true? Do you remember, did you do that? Did you smoke?
I did smoke, yes.
Yeah. Did you take a large number of cigarette breaks?
Probably did, because it was a stressful place, yes.
Okay. And did that have anything to do with drugs?
Absolutely not, no.
Okay. Next entry down, 7th of November 2016. DCO Instone Brewer identified as bringing drugs into the centre. And it says, actions and behaviour would have been monitored as initial reports that lack substance. Were you aware of your actions and behaviour being monitored from November 2016?
No.
And were you aware of being identified as bringing drugs into the centre in November 2016?
No.
4th of November 2016, slightly out of turn. Then it says, DCO Brewer has bought spice and iPhone into the centre on Friday 28th of November 2018, it says, though I think it's meant to be 16. It's believed that the dealing takes place in the IT suite and are sold for £200 directly into his bank account. CCTV viewed, and without specific time frame, this was not proven. There was a lengthy tasking meeting where the police were involved. Did you ever bring spice or iPhones into the centre?
No.
Did you ever have £200 directly deposited into your bank account by a detainee or anyone acting for a detainee?
Absolutely not.
Were you aware that the police were involved in monitoring your actions at this time?
No.
If we can go down to the next entry, 5th of January 2017. It says, Detainee informed RO that 4 times staff were involved in bringing drugs, and it's NPS, which I think is the term for spice, and smartphones into the centre. Detainee was advised not to speak to any staff about this. He described staff as, and then there's 4 descriptions. The second one's a ginger male, and it says the above detainee was debriefed, and the information above was compared to character profiles of staff at Brook and Tinsley House, where DCO Luke Instone Brewer was identified. This detainee gave information freely to multiple staff members, yet was advised against this for his and other safety. Again, did you bring in drugs or smartphones into the centre?
No.
Okay. 8th of January 2017, a detainee was spoken to prior to a transfer and gave the below intel. There are several members of staff who are involved in supplying drugs and mobiles to detainees in the centre. From descriptions given, he has identified Luke Instone Brewer. If we can go on to the next page. And then there's others identified as well. 8th of January 2017, a detainee claims that he and a Somalian detainee who was his roommate bought a phone for £400 from an officer. He claims that the money was paid directly into Luke Instone Brewer's account, then delivered by a female officer about a week before the phone was found. The above detainee's room share history was checked, where it was discovered he never shared with a Somalian detainee, making the account less credible. Did you ever sell a phone to a detainee for £400?
No.
Okay. Next entry, 13th of February 2017. RO was speaking with a detainee when he informed him that DCO Luke Instone Brewer was supplying detainee D4275 with all sorts of things from drugs and phones. CCTV was viewed of this incident but proved inconclusive and proved very little. Body-worn camera not implemented until December 2017. I'm not sure if you have the little code there with the ciphers. Do you have it beside you?
Yeah.
D4275, is that someone whose name you recognise?
No.
Was that someone who you ever supplied with drugs and phones?
No. Absolutely not.
Then the next one records someone witnessing a detainee, who we call DX, speak to you and say, we need to have a chat today about some business. Did you ever have any business with a detainee?
No.
No. And then, sorry. And then it says the CCTV was viewed but proved inconclusive. And intel history was checked. And in the 8 months, intel reports were received, but none of them related to drug use, and only one related to cash disbursements. The detainee was discharged on the 4th of April. 25th of September 2017, it was reported to RO a few weeks ago that officers bringing in drugs, although no names were given. When a known detainee returned to Brookhouse, he asked for Ginge, I miss him. He went on to say when it was really bad in here, that was when Ginge was at his most active in bringing in stuff. RO states she acted dumb to get more information, such as how he got paid, as D162 claims he made thousands. D162 claims, as he lives in Purley, got paid cash. Did you ever pay cash to a detainee for drugs?
Absolutely
Or
not.
sorry, I should have asked that the other way around. Did a detainee ever pay cash to you to bring in drugs?
No.
And then at the bottom it says, dates DCO in Stonebrewer was searched by the security department. And it says dates and items found. One is on the 4th of May 2017 when a broken USB stick was found. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
What was that?
It was just a USB stick.
Okay. And then the 24th of July 2017 says nothing found, and it notes that drug dogs were used. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I remember a lot of people. It was, you know, everyone.
How often did you get searched?
It was sporadic.
What do we mean by that? Twice a
I
year?
couldn't give a number, but it was just. I don't think there was, you know, there wasn't like a consistent pattern,
Okay, so
which was good because then you don't know. Sorry,
It wasn't every month, for example.
no,
No.
but it was good that it wasn't, you know, a static number. You know, it's on random.
And this is obviously a long list of reports
Sure.
of you bringing in drugs and phones. And is your evidence that the first time you were made aware of these allegations was for the purposes of this inquiry?
Yes.
You were never made aware at the time?
Absolutely not.
Does it
Never.
surprise you now to
It
see this
certainly
long
does,
list?
Yeah. You know, if it did shock me. Yeah.
What do you make of it?
Confused. I never did. I'm pretty sure if it was something that was of great severity, they would have suspended me to safeguard the centre. But I'm really confused why people thought I was associated with that, because I never was.
There's
Absolutely
some
not.
evidence we've heard from staff about rumours going around, and I'll come on
Sure.
to that. Were you ever aware of rumours about you doing that?
Rumours, not of me, but rumours was a big thing at Brookhouse. The slightest little thing would spread like fire. So yeah, I can imagine that.
Were you aware of rumours about staff bringing in drugs?
There was rumours occasionally, yeah.
About anyone in particular, or just generally?
Just generally, yeah.
If we can go, please, to SXP 000159 at page 20. This is part of an investigation report compiled by G4S. Page 20, please, Zainab, if that's okay. Thank you. Mr. Insomber, you've seen this before. This records that a detained person known as D1467 alleged that on Delta Exercise Yard in around May 2017, you accepted £4,000 to bring drugs into the centre and gave a bank account number which that £4,000 was paid into. What do you say about that?
Absolutely not true.
And he also alleges that you came into his room a few days later, banged the wall, tapped the window and threw a package onto his bed containing drugs and then left. Is that true?
No.
He alleges that he took possession of the drugs from you and kept them hidden for 8 weeks, and he alleges that you resigned because you got scared. Is that right?
Absolutely not.
Did your resignation have anything to do with being aware of any investigations into you?
No. My resignation was due to the place being unsafe and being attacked.
You were attacked the year before, though, yes?
Yes, but obviously, you know, it takes time to get another job.
If we can go, please, to CGS 00733682. This is, again, the interview of Steve Skitt. And if we can go just a bit down, please, Zainab. This is Steve Skitt, and he notices here that they had intelligence that you were bringing items in, and it says at the bottom paragraph, we involved the police and they were doing some work on it. There was target searching. At some point he realised, and then the intelligence dried up. He has since left. Is that accurate, that you realised that they were doing target searching on you?
No,
You had no idea.
no idea.
If we can go, please, to DPG 000021. At page 27, please. This is again the witness statement of D687. He says, at paragraph 86, I knew DCO in Stoneborough was involved in supplying drugs at Brookhouse. He was totally corrupt. And then over to the next page, please. Up a bit. Paragraph 88, he says, as for his involvement in supplying drugs, I know this because another detained person who I knew was dealing drugs within Brookhouse told me. I don't remember the detained person's name. He was a black man in his 40s or 50s. I remember chatting with him in the D-Wing courtyard, which is next to the library, and asking how he was bringing drugs in. He told me he had an officer doing that bit for him. When I asked which officer, he pointed out Ginge and said he was selling it to him. As I've said, I now know Ginge is called DCO in Stoneborough. What do you say to this allegation that you were doing the bit of bringing the drugs in for this man?
Completely false.
Any idea why he would suggest that you were doing that?
Well, it looks like quite a lot of his statement doesn't put me in good light to begin with, so he's got intentions to not maybe look too great, and it's quite effective by saying someone's smuggling in drugs when they're not.
As I'm sure you appreciate, it's quite a serious allegation, and you're
It
the only
absolutely is.
and you're the only person who he makes that allegation
Sure.
against. So, and he makes other allegations against other people.
Sure,
So
sure.
why do you say he would particularly want to say that you were smuggling
I
drugs?
wouldn't know, but it's not true.
Okay. Paragraph 89 of that statement, he says, my cellmate D343 was also selling drugs in Brookhouse and separately told me that Ginge was bringing it in. D343 was friends with the detained person I mentioned above, who he was also getting the drugs from. So DCO in Stoneborough would give that detained person drugs. He'd sell it on to my cellmate, who would then sell it on to other detained people. D343 had a different view of DCO in Stoneborough and got along well with him, like they were cool with each other. He explained to me that it wasn't just drugs. Ginge could bring in anything for £500 if it was a certain size and weight. These were called a parcel. It could be drugs, a weapon, or other sorts of contraband. Basically, you would contact someone on the outside to arrange for a parcel to be made up for you. You could get them to wrap it in a certain way so you would know if it had been opened or tampered with. You would then get someone on the outside to transfer Ginge the money into a bank account. Once he had that, you would give him pick-up instructions. Ginge would then collect the parcel and bring it into work with him to give to whoever ordered it. I don't know if DCO in Stoneborough ever looked in the parcels, but he knew what he was doing. You don't collect a parcel from a drug dealer and think it's something else other than drugs. Did you ever bring anything into Brookhouse for money, Mr. in Stoneborough?
No,
Did you ever bring a parcel into Brookhouse for a detainee?
absolutely not.
Did you ever receive money into a bank account from a detainee or someone else?
No.
If we can go, please, to TRN 000023. At page 12, please. This is a record of a conversation. You weren't part of it, but it's a conversation between Callum Tully, Adele Hinder. Do you remember her?
Mm-mm.
No. A manager called Sebastian and an officer called Anya. They discuss that managers are convinced that officers are bringing in drugs, and that's at line 372 to 373. Adele Hinder says, yeah. They say it's coming from the top. And there's a discussion of who. There's a mention that Leah had been suspended. And then at lines 389 to 390, it says, I don't hear any names, people tell me, people tell me. And then it notes that Adele Hinder mouths Ginge, referring to a male officer. And then 394, Callum Tully says, Ginge, really, you've heard about Ginge. And Anya says, I'd rather not get involved in anything like that. Were you aware of any rumours about you bringing drugs in?
No.
They also discuss an officer called Leah, who may be Leah Winston. Were you aware of any rumours about her bringing in drugs?
I don't know who that is, no.
One of the things you say in your witness statement, Mr. Inston Brewer, is that although you were called by the nickname Ginge, at least 3 others were as well.
Yeah.
But we've been through these various allegations.
Sure.
You're not suggesting that they're referring to someone else, are you?
No, I honestly don't know.
Okay. And you've named some other people who had ginger hair as well, but they didn't work in didn't work in activities. They weren't nicknamed
No.
Ginge.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
fair.
If we can please go to TRN 00000099 at page 5, please. This is a conversation between Joe Marshall, Callum Tully, and you discussing searches carried out on staff members.
Okay.
And we know, I think, from some of the previous documentation that you were searched on 2 occasions, one in May and one in July. There's a discussion here about an unnamed staff member having gear, is the word used,
Okay.
and he's surprised that this individual got away with it. Do you have any idea who Joe Marshall might have been referring to as having been caught with gear?
No.
No, doesn't ring any bells.
No.
Were you aware of any staff member having been caught with drugs?
No. No. No, not with drugs, no.
With what were you
No,
paused
no.
there?
I remember during that time period, there was a woman from the Aramark shop who got suspended, and everyone said that was related to drugs.
Okay, but no
but
infantry
that's
for
it.
this.
That's it.
Do you remember her name?
No.
Okay. If we can go please to TRN 00000024 at page 2. This is a conversation between Callum Tully and Ramon Geraldo Arbeles. He was the DCM in activities, is that right? Ramon. Was he your manager when you worked in activities?
Yes.
Yeah. And Ramon reports here that someone went in and typed on the computer in a Google search, how to smuggle drugs easy. And when asked who it was, Ramon says either Joe or Ginge. Do you remember, did you ever do this as any sort of prank, typing into a Google search how to smuggle drugs?
No.
No, it wasn't you.
Wasn't me, no.
Okay. So before I move on, your overall evidence is that despite the number of logs of intelligence that was said to be received about you smuggling in drugs, smuggling in phones, the fact that we've got a former detained person who says that he was specifically told by someone you shared the cell with that you were smuggling in drugs,
Sure.
and despite the fact that senior staff members say you were under investigation,
Sure.
you deny ever doing it,
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
and you deny ever knowing about it.
Yes.
You had no inkling at all.
No.
Coming on to a different topic then, if we can go to TRN 000099. At page 2, please. This is a conversation, Mr. Insternborough, between you and Callum Tully.
Yeah.
And it's talking about why Babs has been suspended. This is on the 4th of May. And we know from other evidence that Babatunde Fagbo was suspended around April, May for swearing at a detained person.
Yep.
And you say here, well, he asks, what did he do? And you say, no different to what most officers do. he was like getting a load of racial abuse from a detainee, and that's something you've already told us about.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And then you say Babs, being Babs, told him to go and fuck himself, you know. How did you know what had happened in that occasion?
I think he told me.
And you say Babs being Babs, do you mean that it was common for him to react in this way?
It was common for him to be incited and be racially abused. Yeah.
Common for him to react that way?
He could react like that way, yeah.
Saying go fuck himself?
Yeah, because he's got no other course of action. You know, he's been horrendously racially abused. And the company doesn't care. You know, he's gone through down the avenues with them. He's told them about it, and they ignored it. And what they do, they suspended him for it.
So did you feel he'd been unfairly treated?
Absolutely.
You say that you say no different to what most officers do. What does that refer to? Does that refer to?
I think that's just a twist of my words, really.
Well, it is your
Yeah,
words.
no, it's my words, but I think it's just I misspoke.
Okay. You're not. Are you suggesting that that type of behaviour of swearing at detained people was widespread?
No.
Wasn't?
No.
You describe in your statement being friends with DCO Fagbo. I think we've already. Is that right?
Being
Friends.
friends with him?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you'd witnessed him doing something wrong whilst you were working with him, would you have felt able to report him?
Yes.
Who would you have reported them to?
I would have done a report. It depends on what the situation is. There's different reports for different situations.
If you'd witnessed him swearing at a detainee?
Swearing at a detainee depends on the context. If they're being racially abusive towards him,
Then you wouldn't
I'd probably give it a
reported
pass. No, I'll be honest. Yeah. Yeah, I would.
There's a discussion over the page on page 3 that carries on, and there's a question from Callum Tully about who put the complaint in, and you say I don't know who it was. You didn't know who'd put the complaint in. Is that right?
Didn't know.
And then if we go over to page 4, please. And they're trying to say, they're saying, just say, Ginge, and you're saying, I honestly don't. If I did, I'd tell you who the fucking man is. And then you say, no one likes a snitch. What did you mean by no one likes a snitch?
No, I'll be honest, I don't remember the conversation. To me, on the transcript, actually, I'm not going to, because I don't know.
We've heard
Sure.
quite a lot of evidence from people, including from Owen Syred, the former welfare officer, in the first thing, about him reporting something and having the word snitch scrawled on his on a poster, for example. And we've heard about this culture of accusing people of grassing and snitching.
Sure.
Were you aware of that, of a culture that people don't grass, people don't snitch?
Yeah.
Was that something that was talked about?
Yeah.
And so do you mean when you say no one likes a snitch?
I couldn't say it was 5 years ago, and it's not really something that highlights in my head, really. It's not a big conversational piece to me.
Because I'm
It's
going
not
to
something that
suggest...
I can really remember 5 years ago. Obviously, it's there, but I don't remember having that conversation.
Sure. Well, it's in the transcript, so I'm going to suggest
Sure.
to you...
That's fine.
I'm going to suggest to you,
Yeah.
Mr. Insenborough, that what you were saying is that people shouldn't snitch on officers. Do you think that's right?
No, that's not right. Put it this way: if my philosophy is you've got to look after yourself. If there is something wrong by not snitching on someone, you know, they're not going to protect you. It all depends on the situation, but no, I don't think it's. It's just an off comment. I don't see anything wrong with snitching, or.
So although you say no one likes a snitch, actually you're fine
According
with
to that
snitching.
transcript, like I said 5 years ago, I don't know the context. It could be I was joking. It could be I was trying to bump him off because he kept pressing me for questions. I honestly don't know from 5 years ago.
More broadly, Mr. Inselberg, you say
Yeah.
in your statement that you think some of the offensive comments between staff were an element of bravado or stupidity
Yes.
in the situation, but where they felt it was appropriate because Callum Tully was on the same wavelengths. Is that
Yes,
right?
oh,
Wavelength.
absolutely.
And so do you think that among certain groups, staff felt comfortable making inappropriate comments,
Yes.
whereas among other people, they wouldn't feel comfortable?
Yeah.
And do you think among some groups, among those groups, there was a lack of challenge to inappropriate comments?
In what way?
So you just said that there was some
No,
group.
I think a lot of it was just gallow humour. In a stressful environment, people making very inappropriate humour. Obviously, in a professional level, it's very inappropriate, but that's all it was gallow humour to a lot of them. A lot of people would be deeply offended, but I don't think there was any malice towards it. I think it was just, like I said, gallow humour in a very tough area.
Have you watched? Did you watch Panorama when it
I
came
did
out?
watch it, yes.
And when you saw some of the comments being made, were you surprised by that, or was it what you would expect?
Some of it did surprise me. Some of it didn't.
What bits surprised you?
What in particular surprised me? Yeah, seeing John Connolly using the N-word. He wasn't known for that at all. Obviously, the violence of Jan. I know for certain if I was there, I would have reported him.
What about, there's a phrase we've heard a few officers use as recorded by Callum Tully of, if he dies, he dies. Is that something you heard?
If I heard, no.
Did you ever hear that
No.
phrase? Okay. Finally, Mr. Inson-Brewer, you resigned at the end of July 2017.
Yes.
Is that right? We know you were searched on the 24th of July 2017. Did that have anything to do with your resignation?
Absolutely not.
And you say that in your witness statement that you didn't feel it was a safe place to be,
Yeah.
and there was no real support or intention from G4S to address the issues regarding the abuse of staff by detainees,
That's
as
correct.
well as abuse of detainees by other detainees.
Mm.
Is that right?
That is.
Did you have any concerns at any stage about the abuse of detainees by staff?
At the time, no.
And since?
Since, yeah.
Because?
Because, well, what you've seen on the Panorama investigation, absolutely, yeah.
And have you had the opportunity to reflect on why you didn't see any of the things that were recorded on Panorama?
I've never witnessed it, no.
Have you been thinking at all about it, about why you never witnessed it?
I just guess I just never was involved in it.
Just coincidence?
I
Don't know.
don't know, no.
Okay. I have no other questions, Mr. Inson-Brewer. The chair might have a couple of questions for
Right,
you.
fantastic.
Thank you, Mr. Livingston. Mr. Inson-Brewer, just one question from me.
Sure.
Do you have an opinion about how drugs were getting into the centre?
Visits, probably staff as well. They could be bringing it on themselves through their clothing articles. There's many ways it could come in. But, yeah.
Thank you. I have no other questions.
Chair, if I can invite you to take a 15-minute break and return at 11:55, please.
Thank you for your evidence, Mr. Inson-Brewer. I know it's not an easy thing to go through, but I'm grateful for you coming this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. We have the evidence of Mr. Shane Farrell.
I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Please take a seat. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Farrell. Could you give us your full name, please?
Yeah, it's Shane Farrell.
And you should have a folder in front of you, that white folder. I may refer you to documents in there, or they'll also be shown on your screen. At tab 1 of that folder, if you open it up, is your witness statement, which you made to the inquiry and you signed on the 29th of January 2022. That will be adduced in full, Chair. The reference is SER 000433.
Thank you.
What that means, Mr. Farrell, is we won't go through everything in your statement today. That's already in your evidence. We'll just focus on some of the key issues. And just to note now, you mentioned at paragraph 1 of that statement that you previously filled in a questionnaire for the inquiry.
Yeah.
The information that you provided in that questionnaire is all contained within this statement as well. So there's a single document with all of your evidence to the inquiry in it. And I just want to start with your employment history at Brookhouse then, please.
Yep.
So you cover this in your statement, but briefly, you started at Brookhouse in 2011, didn't you?
I started at Tinsley House at 2011.
Sorry, you started working for the Gatwick
RCs.
centres generally at 2011, and that was having come from an NHS inpatient psychiatric background.
Yeah, I was a residential, so I did the cleaning, like basic housekeeping, so cleaning of rooms and also feeding, dishing out food when required.
Yep. So sort of like an orderly cleaning
Yeah.
role. And so you say, as you say, you started at Tinsley, and that was in a DCO role, was it?
Yeah, that's right.
And then while you were at Tinsley, you were seconded to a management role.
Yeah, it was a temporary role, just to sort of introduce you into the role basically and see if you were suitable for the role.
And when you say management, you mean a DCM role?
As a DCM, yes.
Before you started that role, were you given any additional training, for example, in how to manage others?
No, it was just my experience as a DCO. I believe it was 4 years as a DCO, and I felt that I could potentially make the move up to a DCM.
And you continued in that DCM position
Yes.
then, didn't you? You didn't go back to being a DCO. You moved to Brookhouse from Tinsley. I think that was during Tinsley's closure for refurbishment.
That's correct, yes. But
So-
at that time I was then made a DCO again because there was no need to be a secondment role at
I
that
see.
time.
So you moved to Brookhouse as a DCO?
Yes.
And the refurbishment, I think, is November 2016, is
I
that about right?
believe so. I can't recall the dates.
And when you went to Brookhouse, were you working on reception?
No, I was put into a sort of there was someone that was sick at the time, so I was helping with paid activities, just employing people and into different roles, residents in Brookhouse.
And when did you move to detainee reception then?
That was I can't remember the exact dates. It was. I went for the interview for a permanent DCM role, and then was given a job as DCM.
How long approximately had you been at Brookhouse before that happened?
A month.
I see. So by the time of the relevant period, the period we're looking at is April to August 2017, you were in a permanent DCM role
Yes.
at Brookhouse and managing detainee reception.
Yes.
You discuss at paragraph 14 of your statement the difference between the two centres, because you have experience of both, obviously. Can you tell us a bit about the difference that you found?
Tinsley House, it was generally a more relaxed environment. We didn't at Tinsley House didn't really have anyone with high risks, such as risks to women and children, because Tinsley House housed families there at the same time as well. So there was no risk to women and children. Minor offences like theft, whereas at Brookhouse you had higher offences, rape, murder, also convicted paedophiles. Obviously can't be housed at Tinsley House because of the family unit down there.
What about the difference in the staff? Were the staff different?
Not really, because we were all the same off the same ITCs, which is initial training course. we're all trained exactly the same. There's no different in training. CNR training was exactly the same. Safeguarding, escorting, everything was exactly the same for both sites.
Do you think there should have been different training to prepare you for Brookhouse versus Tinsley House?
Yes, I do. Purely because some of the individuals you're looking after at Brookhouse can be a bit more challenging at times.
Challenging in what way?
Violent, aggressive. You have people withdrawing sometimes. When at Tinsley House you wouldn't have that because we don't have a programme for that at Tinsley.
As in drug addicts?
Yeah, like a methadone programme. We don't have that at Tinsley House. However, at Brookhouse we do.
There's also people, residents with mental health needs. Is that the same at both centres or more pronounced at one?
I think it's more at Brookhouse because we've got the Safe for the custody suites within E-Wing, so we can look after the individuals a little bit better.
You've obviously come into contact with people in mental ill health in your previous job, although I'm not at all suggesting that gave you any experience in terms of managing them, medically qualifications or anything. But did you have any experience or knowledge which helps you on a day-to-day in understanding mentally unwell people?
Not really. We weren't given any additional mental health training as such. We were given a mental health first aid course, but that's got nothing to do with the sort of environment that we work in. It's more to deal with noticing the issues within yourself.
I see. So it's aimed at staff and their own
Yes.
mental health rather
Yeah.
than detainees. Did you find it difficult, if you could at all, to tell between detainees who are mentally unwell versus people who are just aggressive, for example?
No, because I've not been given the proper qualification to be able to distinguish the two.
And the same with people who were maybe just being quiet or who were being, quiet because they were depressed or quiet just because they're quiet?
Again, I mean, you'd have things in place for people that were a bit withdrawn or something, like raise concerns, where you would interact or try and interact with the individuals. Sometimes people just want to be left by themselves, and sometimes they want to voice their opinions.
Have you had any training now on dealing with mentally ill or vulnerable
No.
detainees? And have you had any, I think you'll agree that there's people at Brookhouse who've maybe been tortured in the past or perhaps have PTSD. Do you have any knowledge at all of working with people with these conditions?
I mean, yes, I have worked with people with PTSD. However, no training, again, given.
You mentioned that you had the initial use of force as part of the training course, which is the same for both centres.
Yep.
Do you happen to recall who delivered your use of force training?
No, mate, I can't. Not really. It's like 11 years ago.
No problem. I want to ask about the SMT now. So you discussed
Yep.
the senior management team at page 4, paragraph 21. You say at that paragraph, with regards to the management and leadership culture at Brookhouse, I recall that some of the senior management team, SMT, were approachable and would help staff and some were less so. For example, there were occasions where I would go to a member of the SMT with an issue to try and pass it up the chain, but they would say, just deal with it, and we're not very helpful. And then you say you can't remember specifically what happened. Do you remember which members of the SMT you found helpful?
At the time, you had Sarah Edwards would help me out. She was quite approachable at times. Stacey Dean.
Yep.
Dan Horton, he was very approachable, and because I think at that time he'd just been promoted to SMT, so he was a DCM before moved up to SMT.
He was deputy director, I think, during the relevant period, wasn't he?
So he would, I think, was quite approachable as well because he knew what it was like for us on the floor.
And you say some would say just deal with it or were dismissive. Do you remember who
I
would
can't
be like
recall
that?
who that would be. No.
People at the same level, the SMT level.
Of
though?
SMT level, yes.
Did you ever, if you can recall, have cause to go to SMT and complain about any particular issue?
I would normally just go to my line manager at the time if there was any issues, but that's as and when. I can't recall specifics.
Who was your line manager?
I've had a few over the years. At that time, I can't remember.
The first person when you became a DCM at Brookhouse, do you remember who that was?
I think it was Michelle Brown.
Don't worry too much.
I'm not 100% certain.
We can check. You say that you'd go as and when. Would you do this in a kind of formal process or informally?
No, it was fairly sort of open door. Like if you had an issue, come and speak, and if she could help, then she would. Again, if she couldn't, then she would inform you she couldn't, and try and point you in the right direction to get the information you needed.
And as we've discussed, you were a DCM during the relevant period. Did DCOs come to you to complain about any issues they had?
Not really, apart from overworked and understaffed. But I mean, no real major issues.
So overworked and understaffed was quite a theme, and we'll go on to discuss your view of that as well. Is that something you felt you could do anything about, or did you do anything about it when people reported it?
There's not a lot really. Across the board, everyone knew you were short-staffed. There was overtime available pretty much every day, and multiple lines available. So that they knew we were short-staffed at the time, and yes, they were trying to rectify it by the overtime, offering the overtime out, but people were just burning out.
Did anyone ever complain to you about the way someone had treated a detainee or spoken towards a detainee?
No, not that I'm aware of.
And I think you've already said you didn't really have any training in becoming a DCM, but just to be certain, did you have any training on how to manage staff grievances or staff complaints? No. So I want to ask you about drug use at Brookhouse next. We've heard elsewhere in the inquiry about a high level of spice use at Brookhouse, and that it was particularly bad, I believe, from around Christmas 2016. So that was around the same time that you joined Brookhouse. Did this strike you as a difference between the two centres?
Absolutely. Nothing like that ever happens at Tinsley. You might have the odd incident, but it was very far and few between.
And do you remember being concerned then about the level and the danger to detainees at Brookhouse?
Not really. I mean, you always heard the stories for working at different sites. You hear the stories of, assaults on staff and stuff like that. But you just kind of it's take it part of the job.
So one of the dangers is that people can become violent and assault staff, and it's also dangerous to the individual who takes it potentially.
Yeah.
And it can be fatal, I think, if you take too much.
From what I've been told, but with Brookhouse, we've been quite lucky and not had a major incident.
Was there a concern that you wouldn't be lucky and that there might be a major incident?
Yes, absolutely.
And were these concerns that you shared with other colleagues and discussed?
Everyone was under the same impression. Like, we all thought this is, it could be any day where potentially we could have a death in custody, and we were every member of staff was genuinely worried.
And does that include the SNT? Were they aware of this worry?
Absolutely. I believe they were. I never had any direct involvement with the SNT mentioning that.
Did they give any direction sort of from the top down about how to deal with the spice issue?
Not really. You learn on the job. It was at the time relatively new as well within the IRC estate, especially within Brookhouse especially, and we were just responding to the incidents and just trying to deal with it the best we could.
And you say you were responding to the incidents. What sort of follow-up would there be after, for example, you saw someone had a spice overdose? Did you seek to try and find out how they got it?
You would put your reports in to the security department, and then they would collate the information and try and figure out where it's coming from. Like healthcare would do observations and stay with the individual. We would try if they would let us take them down to E-Wing to the observation rooms, so we could isolate any more episodes of the attack.
And you say at paragraph 24 that you had processes to stop drugs coming into the centre, but it would be fair to say that they weren't very effective.
No.
And you mention also searches of staff. We've asked other witnesses about this, and they say they were quite infrequent.
Once in a blue moon. They weren't very frequent at all.
Did you ever have either a guess or hear rumours or have any concrete idea of how drugs were getting into the centre?
Post was a big one, where potentially it coming in through the post. We tried to put processes in to stop that from happening. There was rumours about staff, but it was just rumours. There was no concrete evidence.
Did you hear the rumours?
I heard the rumours, as did everyone else. There was just no way of. It was just guessing.
Did you hear it from detainees or from colleagues or
Staff. It was like at one point we didn't have visits going on, and it was still coming in.
Right.
So it was post was being more scrutinised. So it just felt the only plausible answer, but there was no evidence, hard evidence to suggest otherwise.
Did anyone's name get mentioned?
Not that I'm aware of.
And you say there was no visits, so you think, well, it's going to be the post or the staff potentially.
It could, that's the only ways it could be brought in.
Is the reason there wasn't any visits because of the spice issue, or was it separate?
I can't
separate
honestly
issue?
remember
Okay.
why the visits had been ceased.
I want to ask now about sort of detainee life at Brookhouse, and particularly about the induction stage. So you
Yep.
were obviously involved in this because you were on reception.
Yeah, we obviously booking them in and then moving on to the induction wing.
And you discussed this at 26 to 29, which is from page 4 and 5 of your statement. So you discuss the process, as you say, booking them in, asking questions such as about their next of kin, any immediate personal needs.
Yep.
And you also say at 27, officers would ask a series of safeguarding questions relating to suicide and self-harm. Where in the centre, in the reception area, would this be done?
Normally, so you'd have your desks in where you'll be booking people in. You also have a search room, and staff, when they were searching, they would ask questions in there. Obviously, if there was more to be highlighted, then we'd sit at a desk and talk to the individual about it.
And the desk, is it sort of open plan, or are they in
Yes.
separate? So it's like
It's sort of
a
open
couple of
plan,
desks
but
all
you'd
next
have
to each other.
a divider
Right.
on
So
the
like a
other side.
partition, but not a
Yeah.
whole room high
Yeah.
partition. And you've talked before about your lack of training in mental health care, of course. Do you think that you had, or that your colleagues had sufficient knowledge to talk to people in this way about their risks of self-harm and suicide?
Well, DCMs at the time were trained in ACDT assessments.
Yeah.
So we would talk to the individual and try and highlight key areas that we need to discuss. We would also, if required, refer to the RMN, which is the mental health nurse. Also, if there was any healthcare issues, again, direct them to the healthcare.
So am I right in thinking that someone might come in on an open ACDT?
Yes.
Or if you learned anything during the induction process, you might also open an ACDT. But that requires either another centre or the detainee themselves disclosing to you
Yes.
that there's a mental health risk.
Yes.
And so if they don't say it, obviously there's no ACDT.
No, I mean, also on movements that we receive, there would be a part on the medical history if there's any acts of self-harm.
Yes. And at page 6, this is paragraphs 35 to 40, you discuss something we've already touched on, which is staffing levels.
Yep.
You say they weren't always sufficient, and that
Right.
included in reception. Can I ask you about the effect of the understaffing on the reception process itself? Presumably it led to queues?
Yeah, I mean, reception back then was quite busy. We had a quite high turnover of residents coming in,
Yep.
in and out the centre. If your residential was where the main part of your job is, looking after the residents within the centre, reception would then sometimes be pulled to try and fill the shortcomings on the units,
Right.
to try and safeguard the individuals on the units.
And so the people who are waiting to be booked in might have to wait for quite a long time, potentially?
Potentially, I mean, obviously, you work as fast as you can, but
Yeah.
you've still got to do your job.
Sure. And you state it's 36. If individuals were kept in the waiting room for too long, then there was a risk of them becoming frustrated. And that you say that this could sometimes result in staff having to de-escalate the situation, so calm them down,
Yeah.
effectively. So people who might have been waiting a long time and might be frustrated with staff who are, as you say, doing the job as fast as they can, although properly. Do you agree that's not the best environment to try and
No, it's not.
discuss maybe a history of torture? Or
It's probably not the best environment, but you do the best that you can to try and help the individuals.
You also talk about the wing staffing, and you say that you think that 2 DCOs per wing was insufficient as well.
Absolutely.
And as the effects of this, you mentioned stress and exhaustion in staff. You say at 39, there were so many residents that you couldn't give them the attention they need. There was not enough time in the day to get the day-to-day tasks done, never mind being able to go above and beyond for the residents. So you can't even manage the basics sometimes.
Sometimes you would be a bit strapped for staff. I mean, you're looking after potentially 120 adults, some of which need quite a lot of help. Obviously, some of them are facing imminent deportation, so want help with solicitors, faxing, emails.
You say at 38 as well that due to staff shortages, DCOs wouldn't be able to get all their tasks done. So what sort of things might be missed? What's kind of lower on the list of things that need to be done every day?
Getting the mail sorted,
Yeah.
running around, doing your ACTT observations was high on the list. So that was obviously the key thing. But your locks, bolts, bars, fixtures, where you go and check the fittings in the rooms,
Right.
stuff like that really.
Yeah.
But the observations were high on the list. So the ACTT was always kept, or you try to keep that as in check.
So you keep that takes precedence, but maybe a detainee who says, you know, my light's not working, that something like that might get lower.
It potentially
for example.
could get overlooked, but you would try to get it done.
Come to it when you could.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to ask about a specific incident now. You give your account of this in your statement at page 9 onwards, paragraph 60 to 65. And it's an incident involving D1538 on the 6th of June 2017. So this is a use of force incident that you were involved in.
Yeah.
We discussed this yesterday, and we saw some footage of it yesterday, in fact. There'd been an altercation between this individual, who we call D1538, and another detained person in the arts and crafts room. And I'm going to skip forward, but in your account of the use of force, you noticed that in the aftermath, he had cuts on his neck and his eye was red, and that was from where he'd been hit by another detainee before you were involved.
I can't remember all of the incident. It was a long time ago.
We have the detainee's memory of the statement. So he's told the inquiry he had a verbal disagreement with another detainee about sitting in a chair. That detainee left the room, but then returned with a stick or a pipe and hit him or punched him in the head. He became angry, although he said he wasn't threatened, and then staff became involved. So that's what he says. And in your words from 63, you say that you became involved, used a head support to support the detainee and protect the other officers that were present. And you say that the detainee was rocking around and being actively resistant.
Yeah.
And you mentioned it was recorded on CCTV that you've seen. And you say that head support requires taking control of the head as opposed to using force as such.
Yeah.
So it's supportive rather than active force. Is that a
So you
fair
take
way?
control of the head. You try and keep the head, neck, and spine in line as much as possible, and not dip the head below the heart.
Why is that?
Well, it could potentially cause medical complications. If you're pushing someone's head down too far, it could cause risk to the diaphragm compressing and difficulty to breathe.
Is that something you would have learnt on your
That's
course?
covered on your use of force course.
So can we look at your account from the time so we can see your, obviously, recollection much closer to the time. It's CJS 005615. It'll come up on your screen if you want to see it there. It's and we'll go to page 12. So this is the front of the use of force form from the day. This is your account, as we can see, DCM Shane Farrell. And I just want to read the first bit. When responding to a first response in the art room at Brookhouse, I found that 2 detainees had an altercation, and the most irate detainee was 1538. I came across 1538, who was being restrained by detainee custody officer Ryan Bromley and DCM Nick London. And it says this is to stop him going after a detainee that had apparently punched him. As he was being restrained, I could see that he was thrashing his head all over the place, so I decided to take control of D1538's head as he was close to the cabinet. I decided to apply head support so that he didn't hit his head on the cabinet and to protect the officers. So he's thrashing his head all over the place, close to a cabinet, presumably because it's an arts room, there's storage cabinets in there.
I can't tell you what was in the cupboards, but it's
Sure.
storage.
And you apply head support, as you say, to protect his head from hitting the cabinet and from hitting the other officers. So we watched this yesterday, but obviously you weren't there then. I was asking Mr. Bromley about
Yeah.
it, so I'll put it on now if that's okay. It's BBC 000073, thank you. It's just a short clip, so we'll watch the whole of it. And you're there in the white shirt because you're a DCM role,
Yeah.
and you're obviously wearing glasses as you are now. So we'll see you come in from the left-hand side. That's fine, thank you. Thanks. So what we see there, especially the first movement, you take control of his head and pull it down quite far. You agree with that?
Yeah.
And you've told us that you need to keep the head, neck and spine in line and not dip the head below the heart.
Yeah.
But would you agree that what we see you doing there is quite rapidly pulling his head downwards?
It's how you take control of the head. That's the way I've been trained, and I've never been pulled up on my technique.
Is that something? Is that a technique you've used before then on detainees?
I've been head support on the arms. Been a support officer. I've covered all various roles of use of force.
So head support of an officer tends to be that sort of action, does it?
Yes.
He wasn't that close to the cabinet when you first do that, I'd suggest. So, contrary to what you say in your report, then there's not that much risk he was going to hit his head on the cabinet before you took control.
From the first time I took control of head, no. The risk was to staff and to the resident. He could have hit his head on the staff or on their shoulders or something, could have caused risk. He was actually resistant, so I took control of the head. However, when I wrote my report, I believed that to be correct at the time.
But you now say not a risk of hitting his own head.
Not a risk to hitting his head on the cabinet at that time, but the second time there was definite risk as he was right up against cabinets.
Is there also a risk of injuring the detainee by the action that you performed?
Potentially, but you do it as safely as you can. At the time, I believed it was a risk. It was proportionate. My use of force was proportionate to the time.
And I mentioned.
Reasonable. Sorry.
I mentioned a moment ago that he had injuries, not as a result of this, but to his face from the other detainee who'd attacked him. Did you take those into account when you decided to apply force to his head?
At the time, I can't remember. It was a long time ago. I can't remember if I noticed it before the use of force or during the use of force or after the use of force.
I can put it back on the screen if you like, but in Mr. London's account, in his use of force report, so within the same long document, but Mr. London's own account, he says DCM Shane Farrell then took control of D1538's head as he came close to hitting his head on the metal cupboards behind him. You've just said that actually wasn't the case when you first took control of his head, but you've both written that in your reports.
Yeah.
Did you discuss before you filled in the use of force form that justification?
No. I mean, you don't before doing after the incident you go off and do your reports. You don't look at CCTV. You don't look at you don't collude. I mean, I don't know where Nick was working. I can't remember where I was working, but I'd have gone off to a computer to fill out my report.
So it's just a coincidence that you both made the same comment about it being to
Must
prevent
have been.
him.
I don't know.
And there's no body-worn video camera footage of this event, is there? Do you know why that is?
Well, I don't think I was wearing a body-worn camera at the time. So I wouldn't have been wearing a body-worn... Well, by the looks of it, I wasn't wearing a body-worn camera, so there mustn't have been any available.
Was it quite frequent that there weren't any available to wear?
A lot of cameras were damaged, out for repair. There weren't many body-worn cameras at the time.
And there was no injury to detainee form here either within that red document we saw. And you mention this in your report and you say, well, it's healthcare's responsibility
It's
to
a
fill it in.
healthcare form to complete. although yes, we collate it all. If it's not, we've got 24 hours to submit the use of force forms to the Home Office. So it would have been submitted without the F213. Why it's not there, I can't comment on why it's not there.
Who tells healthcare that there's been a use of force in order that they fill in the F213?
Sometimes it's the Oscar one, so the one that's in control of or in charge of the building at the time. It can be done by other officers if there's multiple incidents going on. So it could be any manager or DCM.
So in this incident, you're not the Oscar one. How would the Oscar one have found out about the use of force happening?
I think he was on the scene.
And in terms of the reaction to this event, Mr. London was obviously present, as was Mr. Bromley, because they had both of the detainees' arms. Obviously, Mr. Tully was there because the footage that we see is his undercover footage.
Yeah.
The inquiry has seen footage of, or has read, a transcript of Mr. Bromley describing these events to Mr. Tully. I asked him about it yesterday, in fact, and he described it in the following way, as part of a conversation with Mr. Tully. Mr. Tully said, "Did you see Shane?" And then a comment about the classroom. And Mr. Bromley said he took his head clean off, and then later said they pulled his neck right down. Callum Tully also did a video diary shortly after this event where he says, "This manager Shane just comes in and grabs his head and pulls it down. It's just a complete overreaction, completely unnecessary." And later says he just sticks it out. The arm just goes, he yanks him down and had him in this headlock. I couldn't really believe it. It inflamed the situation massively. Did anyone raise concerns like this with you at the time?
No one's raised any concerns about it at all.
I'm asking you to speculate a bit here, but knowing that Mr. Bromley did say that about the event, although not to you, does it surprise you that he didn't raise that with you?
Absolutely. I'm quite an I've got an open door policy that all my staff I work with, if they've got an issue, regardless if it's me or not, speak to me about it.
But you said that no staff ever complained to you about assaults
No.
on detainees. And obviously Mr. Tully didn't raise it with you either.
No.
And no one else who was there at the time made any comment to you. So as
No.
you say, no idea that anyone thought it was excessive.
No, I mean, how are you supposed to know if no one tells you?
I want to ask about another incident now, which happened on the 13th of May 2017. And again, we have seen footage of this before, but I'll remind you of the background. So this is an incident involving D687. We heard about this also at the end of Phase 1 last year. D687 had been in Brookhouse for some time. He spoke on the footage we've seen and in his statement about how he'd lost his brother and hadn't been allowed to attend his brother's funeral. And he was due to be moved to the Verne, which was very far away from his family. I think it's down on the south coast.
I believe it, it's Dorset way, maybe. I couldn't tell you the exact location.
Don't worry. So he was due to be moved to the Verne anyway, and he went to the toilet and cut his T-shirt off. You discussed this in your statement at page 7, so paragraphs 42 to 44. Do you recall this incident now? So you start with, I do recall an incident where a resident was in the discharge toilet and refused to be transferred.
Yes.
Have you seen the footage of this?
Yes.
And I think you're there throughout. We'll have a look at the transcript, I think, to start with. So it's TRN 0000007. And just while that's getting up on the screen, did you know that he was on an open ACDT when you arrived at the toilet?
I can't remember. I can't remember if he was on an ACDC or not.
Is it the sort of thing, and I'm asking you to talk in general terms, that you would be informed of as you arrived on a scene like this?
It was a spontaneous incident, so not necessarily. However, if he was down in reception, the ACDT document would already be down there, so I can't remember what duties I was performing that day, whether I was reception manager or if I was working on res. I couldn't tell you.
Okay. It's TRN 00000, and it's the one with 7 on the end. I'll read it to you then. I think we've also got it in the bundle, so let me just check if I've got the reference and I can tell you where the hard copy is. You should have it at your tab 15. The one that we've got there just starts at page 22, but I'll tell you about the background first, which we have. I can read from the transcript, and we've seen it in other contexts as well as seen the recording. So the incident as it's filmed by Mr. Tully starts with D687 saying, "You lot are going to put me in a body bag and take me out of here. That's the only way I'm leaving this toilet." He says, "Come near me and I swear to God I'll let myself go." And then somebody who's described as Officer 4 on the transcript we have says, "We'll wait for a minute until you pass out and then we'll cut you down." And then says, "No one's dying today." And the detainee responds, "There's no passing out, bruv. I'm looking to die. Bruv, you've got to understand." It's DCM Donnelly, as far as we've identified it, who says, "We'll wait for a minute until you pass out and then cut you down." Do you remember hearing that?
No.
D687 says he remembers that, and it added to his feeling of worthlessness. Do you agree that's an inappropriate comment to make?
Absolutely.
And if you had heard it, would you have challenged Mr. Donnelly on it?
Yeah, I would have picked him up on it and had a quiet word in his ear saying it's not the sort of thing you need to be saying.
Is that unusual coming from Mr. Donnelly in your experience?
Yeah, I believe so. I've never witnessed any derogatory comments that I can recall anyway.
Mr. Tully says about Mr. Donnelly, prompted by a different incident on the 4th of July 2017 with a detainee called D865. Chris Donnelly hated the detainees, and I'm sure he was content on letting the detainees suffer. I would say, in relation to this event, it was at least 2 minutes before the first response being called and Chris Donnelly removing the ligature from his neck, a different event. But it says he hated the detainees. You worked with him. Do you agree or disagree about that view of his attitude?
Personally disagree, but that's my personal belief.
Did you ever see him do anything that made you think he wasn't particularly caring?
No, but I mean, if there was anything, then surely he wouldn't be employed.
Because you would rely on somebody to report it?
Well, yeah, if you're there to care for people, you're not there for any other reason.
Can we move to the incident of use of force itself? So there's a long build-up which I won't ask you to show. I'm just going to ask you to cue up the video if you don't mind. It's BBC 000654. Thank you. So there's a long build-up where D687 is speaking. I've read some of it out. He's distressed. He goes on to say he's had enough, and he talks about his mother. And what we'll see when we get the video on the screen is D687 perched on the side of the toilet with a ligature or a piece of fabric around his neck, a cigarette in his hand. Dan Horton is speaking with him, offers him a lighter, and then when D687 allows him to approach, there's a struggle. Mr. Horton restrains him and others join in. And your role in this, according to your use of force form at the time, was that you took control of D687's right arm, I think. Mr. Donnelly applied the handcuffs, and you say in your form that we may come to look at that the reason you took control of his arm was that Mr. Tully and Mr. Martin were struggling. So the footage, we'll watch it. Some of it is quite plain to see and some of it is quite difficult to see. But that's just...
I also think, I don't think Martin was, DCO Martin was struggling. It was DCO Tully that I had to take over from.
Right. So Mr. Tully was on the arm that you ended up taking over. Okay, fine. So you're, again, wearing a white shirt because you're the DCM. Can we start it from the time on the timestamp of 13:12, please? Or the player time of 10:40, thank you.
Put me in a body bag and take me out of here. That's the only way I'm leaving this toilet, bro. I'm telling you this now. I'm not having it. I don't know. I don't want to get no more.
Thanks.
3 years, bro. I'm fucking British. What the fuck am I doing in here, bro? You told me that, bro.
Don't you understand it? Have you got a lot?
Yeah, I'm doing it for my mum. I'm not doing it no more, bro. That's it. I've had enough, bro.
Have you got a lot?
I want a light, please, yeah. Bro, don't come near me, bro.
Put it in your mouth, geezer.
Nah, bro, give me the light. I'll do it myself.
No, not with this shit. Here, I'll go.
I don't want no
Look,
fucking light.
I'm fucking in.
I don't want no light, bro. Stay away from me, bro, innit?
Hold this off. Still got it running, mate. Well, the ligatures away.
get off me now. You can get off me now. You can get off me now. Bro, just look at the end, man. Mother's life, man. Whatever I go, yeah, just look over me. What I do. See, like, fucking dab it in the box, yeah? That's when it's gonna be on. Watch. When I leave in the box, that's when it's gonna be on. I promise you. I promise you. I promise you, bro. I'm gonna end up fucking leaving in the box, yeah? I promise I'll leave in the box, man. And I promise you, bro. Mother's life. You lot think I'm talking shit, what? I had enough, bro. You lot think I'm joking, yeah? It's past, bro. It's past that. I'll get on my fucking arm, bro. Let off, bro. I'm on the cuff. Get on my fucking. Bro, I swear that I'll start biting people, bro. If you don't fucking. Bro, can you let go of my arm, please? I'm on the cuff. Let go of me, then let it. I'm cuffed in it. What are you holding me for? Get on me. Stop fucking resting on my arm. Bro, stop resting on my arm, bro. You're breaking my fucking arm, bro. Stop resting on my arm. Bro, I swear to God, I'll start. Relax. I'll start spitting or I'll start biting. You lot don't want that. Don't sit on my thing, bro. Whatever you do, don't fucking violate me, because I will fucking violate you lot as well, you know. Hey, give me my trainers, bro. What the fuck? Give me my trainers, bro. Give me my trainers, bro. Bro, why you got my trainers? Yeah, relax. My head in the fucking toilet, bro. You fucking taking the piss. Yeah, my head's not fucking on the ground, mate. Don't fucking put my head on the ground, bro. I'm not on the ground, bro. Let's go my head on the ground, bro. Give me my trainers,
And your trainers will come.
yes, I'm gonna stand up to put my trainers in it. Yeah, now I'm put my trainers in it. What are you doing, bro?
Where are we going? Sorry, man.
Can we stop there? Can you just go forward a couple of seconds? I'll just press play and I'll tell you when to stop. Thanks.
You want to take a seat?
Yeah, stop there. Thanks. You might have caught that. That's you there, isn't it? We can
Yep.
see on the screen. And you've got sort of straps around your
Yep.
arms. Is that a body-worn
His
video
body-worn camera strap, yeah.
Do you know if you were wearing a camera?
I can't recall if I was or not.
It looks like there's something on your shoulder, but it's a bit difficult to say. I'll just ask the evidence handler to play it. If you just watch it while you're
Yeah.
kind of moving, because it's easy to see when you're moving. Just play it for another few seconds. Okay, you can stop it now. Were you able to tell whether
Yeah, I
that...
was wearing a body-worn camera.
But we don't have any footage from that camera. And I
No.
think when it's on, you can see a red light on it normally.
I believe so. I can't. We use different cameras now. Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
Do you know why you would have been wearing it, but it wouldn't have been on?
May have just not remembered to turn it on. I believe they were fairly new to the role, wearing body-worn cameras at the time. I don't know why I didn't activate it.
Do you accept you should have activated it?
Absolutely, should have.
And would there normally be, at the start of a use of force, like a warning or a reminder to people to turn their
No.
cameras on? And we also know that nobody else turned theirs on either.
Okay. Yeah.
The only footage we have is, I think there's CCTV outside of the room, and then there's Callum Tully's undercover footage.
Yep.
So we don't have any official
Okay.
recording. Can you help me with the process for body-worn video camera footage? After, if you have turned it on, after you've made the recording, do you upload it somewhere? How does it get processed?
You would have. I think there was a camera docking station in the Oscar One's office at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And once it was docked, I don't know whether or not it automatically downloaded, or if a member of security had to come and download the footage. I'd had no dealings with how that process worked at the time.
Did anyone, either after this event or otherwise, ever pick up on the fact that body-worn video camera footage hadn't been obtained from a use of force? And
No.
say to you, well, where's the footage?
No one's ever told me about it until recently, when I received the package from yourselves and read the PSU investigation, that there was a recommendation to be spoken to about the body-worn camera not being activated.
Yeah. And you say that it's a sort of docking station, so you return it. Was that be at the end of a use of force or at the end of the day, do you know?
I think it was generally after the day, because you could be involved in multiple incidents, and yeah, the camera should have been activated.
Do you know about the role of, or the potential role of, a body-worn video camera as a de-escalation technique in itself? So somebody's, either very distressed or very angry, and you can say, I'm going to turn my camera on now, and that might change things?
Yeah, and I've used it in the past now, where I've activated the camera as de-escalation. But I have also witnessed it when you do activate them. Sometimes it can escalate the situation as well.
Is that, you say you use it now, is that training you've had recently, or did you know that at the time?
It's just something over the years now, of turning up to incidents. It's just habit now, I suppose.
Can I ask about the incident itself then, rather than the recording of it? So we saw Mr. Horton pretending he was going to give D687 a light, and then when he was close enough to him, initiating the restraint. Did you know that that was his plan, that he was going to do that?
I don't believe so. No, I can't honestly remember the lead up. I have vague recollection of it, but all what I've seen is probably the best memory of it I've got.
Thinking about then, or that event or other events, had you seen colleagues do this, so make an excuse to approach somebody and then use force on them?
No, not that I'm aware of.
The inquiry has an expert you may be aware of, Mr. Collier, who commented on this as well as other incidents, and he says, at paragraph 221 of his report, I am concerned about the actions of D.D. Horton, Deputy Director Horton. Using subterfuge as a means to get closer can remove all trust that a detainee has in staff and will make future incidents more difficult to resolve. Of course, we can ask Mr. Horton about his actions, but can you see the logic of that you remove trust by offering to do one thing and doing another?
I do, but also, Dan was probably trying to do the best that he could at the time. You've got someone in front of you potentially wanting to end his life in front of you. That's the last thing anyone wants to have to deal with. So I believe at the time Dan was probably trying to act in the best capacity that he could.
Well, as I said, we can ask him about why he did his actions in the way that he did them. But as another member of staff there, who doesn't potentially know that that's the plan, because it is a surprise, does it put you in a difficult position where you're having to react without knowing what the plan's going to be?
I mean, yeah. I mean, I wasn't on the initial restraint. I was helping taking over from someone else. So yeah, it's a difficult situation to be in front of. You've got someone potentially wanting to take their own life. You try you do your best for the individual.
And I understand it wasn't your decision to use force. Obviously, it was Mr. Horton who instigated it. But Mr. Collier also says at 239 that he doesn't believe the restraint was necessary in the first place, as engagement was taking place and staff could react if the threat escalated. And on that point, you gave an interview to the PSU, which you've mentioned. I'm only going to refer to the PSU interview because it may be a better account of your memory than now many years later. Obviously, if you recall it differently now, or you've seen the footage and it reminds you differently, tell us differently. But in your interview with the PSU, you said that Mr. D687 was sat on the toilet with a T-shirt around his neck, almost like a sling, not wound into a rope or cord. And I think we saw that on the video footage as well. It's quite kind of loosely around his neck. Would you agree with that? So it's not tied tightly. Would you agree that that suggests there's no very immediate risk of harm?
Potentially, but then someone can always still drop their body weight, and something wrapped around your neck, it's still going to cause damage to the individual as well.
From your from what you understood of the event then, or witnessing it now, do you think that if it had dropped off the toilet, it would have been tight enough that it would have caught his neck?
I don't think it would have been tight enough to cause serious harm, but something around your neck, it could still cause problems.
Do you think that, as it might not have caused serious harm and there was ongoing kind of communication with the detainee, it could have been a planned use of force rather than an unplanned use of force?
Potentially, but a planned use of force or planned intervention, it takes time, and potentially things could have escalated and could have still turned into a spontaneous event.
We have your use of force form. I'll ask for that to be put on the board, please. It's CJS 005652, and your account is at page 25, so I'll ask for that page to be shown, please. So it's just thank you. You talk about entering the room, seeing him sitting on the toilet, t-shirt around his neck, DCM Donnelly trying to de-escalate, and then by this time Duty Director Dan Horton has arrived, and then you say when Dan entered the room he asked D687 how he was and why he was doing this. D687 stated that he didn't want to transfer as he was settled at Brook. Dan left the room with DCO Darren Bullard, where Dan asked for the fish knife that was handed to him. Dan then entered the toilet area again and went to cut the T-shirt away from the disabled rail at this point. DCO Johnny Martin and Callum Tully attempted to gain control. D687 at this point had dropped himself down to the floor. DCO Martin gained control of D687's left arm, but DCO Tully appeared to be struggling, so I took over and secured his right arm at the base of his back. So, as you say, you took over from DCO Tully.
Yeah.
But you don't mention in this record that Mr. Horton offered a lighter and then instigated a use of force that you weren't aware of and restrained D687. You just say he entered again and went to cut the T-shirt away.
Yeah.
Is there any reason why that's not in your report?
Again, it's one of them things. It's a spontaneous moment. You complete the report to the best of your ability at the time. It looks like he's gone to hand a lighter over. You can hear the resident asking for a lighter, so I'm assuming that's what happened. But it was just a part of the report that in the report it should be, but I didn't recall it at the time of completing.
You say that Dan left the room with DCO Bald where Dan asked for his fish knife.
Yeah.
Could you hear that happening?
I think I was outside the room at the time. I can't honestly remember specifics.
Were you concerned about the number of people restraining D687 at the time?
At the time, no. I believe there was three of us, myself, Callum, Martin and Dan. Obviously I took over from Callum, but at the time I believe there was just three of us on him at one time. That's what should be happening, unless someone's posing more risk.
So was he particularly struggling or quite easy to restrain?
Going by the reports, it seemed quite easy restraint, if you can call it easy. There doesn't seem to be much fighting going on.
So you're not restraining him because he's trying to fight you in the first instance, are you? It's to stop him hurting himself.
Yeah.
Which is potentially different because they're not trying to.
Yeah.
It's not a detainee trying to attack you. I asked you, were you concerned about the number of people restraining him, and you say not at the time. Looking back, are you concerned about it?
I think yes, because it appears to be 4 staff restraining one individual, and the 4th should only be used if the residents escalated. And in the footage and in the reports, it's clear that he's not that resistant.
So if he's escalated, so if he becomes violent.
So if he starts kicking his legs around, you might apply a 4th officer to take control of the legs.
And the ligature was removed, I think, quite quickly. We hear it on the video that it's been obviously cut off, and then when he has dropped to the floor, it's no longer around his neck at that point. Why didn't the restraint stop then?
I believe he still didn't want to continue because he was there for a transfer.
Yes, he was.
He was there for a transfer, so we still had a duty to produce him to the escorts, and he didn't obviously want to go because of the whole incident with the ligature. We've then produced him to the escort in, I think it was Tascor at the time, that's where we produced him to task or.
So the ligature is removed, the threat of self-harm is gone away,
Yep.
and then the reason for the use of force immediately becomes to remove him to the vern.
Yes.
Without any sort of pausing or discussion, you just carry on restraining him so you can move him away.
Yes.
But you didn't know that was the plan, presumably, because you didn't know that
It was a
planned use of
spontaneous
force.
incident. You dealt with whatever was in front of you at the time. He clearly didn't want to go on his transfer. I believe if there was a suitable crew move, that was he'd refused previously before, so a suitable crew move would have been created for us to produce him under restraint if necessary.
But you're presuming that, though, aren't you? Because there's
I
no
am.
discussion.
That's the only time a suitable crew would be tasked is if there's been previous attempts to transfer and he's must have refused before.
He's not given an opportunity to walk compliantly to task or after the ligature's been removed, is there?
Yep.
So the use of force is used to stop the self-harm. Threat of self-harm goes away. There's no attempt to say, well, you're not going to hurt yourself now, will you come with us? It's just a continuing restraint, isn't it?
Yes.
Do you accept that's inappropriate?
Maybe in hindsight. However, at the time, we've dealt with the incident the best that we thought was at the time.
You said in your interview to the PSU, I'll just read one part of it. You mentioned, I'll put it on the screen actually, and then you'll be able to see what it says. It's HOM 002655, and it's page 2, please. And again, if you remember differently now you've seen the footage, you can correct it or give us further detail. It's the third paragraph down, please, of page 2, thanks. Starting with DCM Chris Donnelly. Enter the DWA. DCO Martin had taken hold of D687 arm in a final lock stretched out or at the base of his spine, but DCO Tully had been struggling with the other arm because this had been underneath D687. DCM Farrell managed to get control of the arm quite easily. DCO Tully may have loosened in the struggle and placed it at the base of his spine in an inverted wrist hold. DCM Farrell held the crease where the elbow is and pulled the arm out. He took hold of the wrist in a final lock, thumb and index finger, and hold back and place at base of the spine. The slight push on the wrist as it is bent back affected people's pain threshold at different levels. He put on no pressure. D687 had not screamed or said his wrist was hurting. D687 had not raised any health concerns while on the floor, and if he had a medical response would have been called. Seeing the footage, do you still suggest, if you did to the PSU at the time, that D687 raised no health concerns?
I think not. I think I heard him say, "Get off my back," or at some point, but
He says, if we put it on the screen, perhaps TRN 0000007, and if we go to page 22. Do you have that? Oh, this is the one that you didn't have. Sorry, you already told me that. Well, we saw it on the subtitles, but obviously you may have been looking at the screen. And for the reference, it's at your tab 15, so you will have it in your bundle if you look it up. I think you've got it possibly open there. He starts by saying, look, I'm on the cuff, get off. Halfway down that first column, can you let go of my arm, please? I'm on the cuff, let go of me then. In it, I'm cuffed in it. Stop fucking resting on my arm. Top of the second column, bruv, stop resting on my arm, bruv. You're breaking my fucking arm, bruv. That's him raising a health concern, isn't it?
yes,
Did you hear that at the time?
I don't recall hearing it at the time. No.
If you heard it at the time, would you have stopped applying pressure to the arm?
Yes.
And we've mentioned your interview at the PSU and the wrist lock. Can you tell us what a wrist lock is?
It's sort of applying pressure. It's probably you hold the thumb and forefinger, and then you hold it to an angle.
Yep.
And then if you feel the more pressure you put on, it obviously cause more pain.
Right.
So, but you try and obviously if you put more pain on, someone's going to become more refractory, so you don't push back completely, otherwise you cause more harm and cause more risk.
Why apply that at all in this situation?
Because that's to put handcuffs on. That's the technique.
And finally, in your account to the PSU, again, I'll read it. We don't need to get it on the screen unless you'd like to see it. It's the same reference as before, though, in your account to the PSU, but page 4 of it. The handcuffs were applied to the rear as that is how they are trained. Is that right?
Yes.
DCM Farrell had not heard D687 say he could not breathe, or someone had kicked or punched him or sat on his back. If he had said he could not breathe, officers would have instantly repositioned themselves. DCM Farrell had not wanted D687 to sit down in handcuffs to the rear. Why is that? Is it painful if you...
It just caused more pressure on the chest.
But it had been D687 who wanted to sit down. And then it says they'd stayed close enough to him to stop him falling and hurting himself. Do you remember it being D687 who said he wanted to sit down?
I can't recall.
And if I ask you to just look at your tab 15 again, so this is the transcript that ends with 07 for the note, but we don't have it on the screen. At the bottom of page 23, that's line 89, I believe it's Mr. Horton is marked as Officer 5. Can you see that there in the second column? Officer 5 says, do you want to take a seat? D687 says, get off me, bruv, man. And then at the top of the next page, Officer 5 says, sit down. So he didn't want to sit down, did he? He was told to by the looks of this.
Yeah.
Do you know why you might have said that D687 was the one who wanted to sit down?
It might have been just an honest mistake. Like, if that's the way I record it, that's the way I record it. I can't change.
It wasn't you who told him to sit down, but
I don't believe it was, no.
I'm not suggesting it was, but you told us that people shouldn't sit down or should be discouraged from sitting down with their handcuffs behind them because of pressure on the chest.
Potentially, yes.
So do you agree that it was inappropriate for him to be asked to sit down?
Yeah, I guess so. It might be the case that the restraints were about to be taken off as well. I don't know.
I'm going to ask about one last use of force event, just a very brief question on it now. This is one that you mention at 55 to 56 of your statement, and it's a use of force on D2734, and the question is just about the way it's recorded. So you may recall the use of force form itself that you filled in said that it was used to prevent a detainee from assaulting another, but the G4S spreadsheet said it was PY, which stands for protect yourself.
Yeah.
And does protect yourself in this context mean it was done to protect a member of staff?
Is that
what you know
this is
stand for?
I think it's assault on detainee or resident, or assault on staff.
I see. And we asked you why it was recorded differently on the spreadsheet versus the form, and you said you don't know.
No.
Do you know who completes those spreadsheets?
It's normally the Oscar one of the day, but then it could be another manager. Depends on the workload of the Oscar one.
And again, there was no record of injury form attached to this, and I think you say the same as you did before, it's healthcare who complete those. And you never received feedback that they were missing from
No.
forms of use of force you've been involved in. Fine, thank you. I'd want to ask you then just about something that you say at page 13 of your statement, paragraph 95. You say some of the footage shown on the programme was shocking to see. I personally had never seen anything like it whilst working at Brookhouse, and I was disgusted by some of the behaviours shown, particularly the derogatory comments and the strangling. I did not expect this type of behaviour from anyone at the centre. You had said at paragraph 19, which is at page 3, that in terms of the values of G4S and its staff, there was an obvious culture that everyone wanted to look after the individuals. And you say that the people you worked with were caring, professional and respectful. So obviously your view at the time was that they were caring, professional and respectful. But it's clear, isn't it, having seen Panorama, that some staff were not.
I would say some, yes.
Some were quite the opposite.
Yes.
Have you reflected on how, within a place of work that I know you'd only joined quite recently at the time, but you were there the entire relevant period, you believed it to be caring, professional and respectful, and yet those shocking behaviours were going on at the same time. Have you reflected on how you came not to realise that?
Not like I think it's because I don't tolerate that sort of behaviour. If it happened, I'd have reported it if it happens in front of me, I'd report it. I'm just surprised at some of the people's actions.
Was there anything concerning on Panorama, for example, the language used towards detainees that you had seen?
I think some of the language, is derogatory. It isn't nice and potentially could make people feel bad about themselves and increase self-harm potentially.
But is that language that you'd seen firsthand before you watched the programme? You'd seen people using at Brookhouse?
No.
I don't have any other questions for you, Mr Farrell, but the Chair may have some questions to you.
Thank you, Mr Farrell. I just have one question for you. So we've heard from Miss Moore, and you've responded to some of her questions in relation to a PSU investigation, and that you were unaware of the recommendation that you needed to be spoken to about not having turned on your body-worn camera.
Yeah, that's correct.
I'd like to ask you a question in relation to investigations that take place now, and whether you, as a manager, receive feedback from PSU or from internal investigations that are carried out about the staff that you manage in relation to advice that they have been given.
What currently?
Can you tell me anything about that?
I haven't had any dealings with any PSUs of my staff or of myself since, I've had one since Panorama, but I haven't had any feedback from currently or past.
So is it your understanding that if a member of staff who you manage, who you supervise, did have feedback as a result of an investigation, that you would be made aware of that?
I'd like to think so, but I don't think that's the case.
Okay. Thank you very much. They're the only questions I have for you. I appreciate it's not an easy experience. I'm grateful for you coming to give your evidence today, Mr Farrell.
No,
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. It's 1:05, but if we do come back at 2:00 and just have a very slightly shorter lunch, we've got the evidence of Mr Stephen Webb next.
Thank you very much. I will see you at 2:00. Thank you. Thank you, Mr Farrell.